The young man leaned over Yona and demanded that she open her eyes, because if she fell asleep, she might never wake up again. The girl opened her eyes and saw Duke Khan Leroy hanging right above her. She, Yona Madro, the emperor's sword, served the ruler Richard faithfully and was on his side even before he ascended the throne. For the sake of her master, she was ready to do anything, even if it seemed incredible. At some point, the emperor called the girl to him and said that recently unpleasant rumors had been circulating about the relationship between them. The man assumed that the girl needed to be married off, and she was not concerned about the groom's candidacy. For some, a wedding is the most significant moment in their lives. But Richard chose a duke as her husband, and the strategy best suited to increasing his own influence. The duke had always been suspicious of the girl because she was the eyes and ears of the emperor, and such a marriage was doomed to failure. From the moment they stood at the altar until now, Yona never considered them as spouses. The girl always thought that the duke thought the same, but he came for her on the battlefield. She even asked why the young man appeared in the middle of the battle. However, Khan saw nothing strange in the fact that a husband came to the aid of his own wife. However, he agreed that in their case it looked very strange. Yona realized that the wound she received in the battle was much deeper than she thought, so she would not survive. The Duke promised that he would tell the true reason for his appearance, only after they got out of the battlefield alive. Yona noted that these were impossible conditions. She would soon die, and the same fate awaited her husband if luck did not help him. The Duke simply stated that if the girl still had the strength to make barbs, it meant she was saving her life. The girl did not understand why he was behaving so unusually, and why her husband, with whom she had exchanged only a few words the entire time, came for her, abandoned on the battlefield by the emperor, whom she had protected so much. The first thing Yona wanted to do was make sure that His Majesty was safe. The Duke was irritated and did not understand why the girl was still worried about the one who left her alone. She knew that to fall for her master was an honor for any knight, no matter who he was. While helping the girl, the Duke assumed that the rumors about her and the emperor were true, which surprised Yona. At that moment, the girl started coughing, and Khan asked her to hold on a little longer, because soon his people would be here. The girl assumed that the guy really had come all the way here alone, because he was worried about her. She realized that she had been so cold towards him, knowing that she would soon die, and now these were her last minutes of life. Suddenly, Yona let go of her sword and asked her husband to do her one last favor. The young man was worried about the girl and asked her not to talk, otherwise she would say something stupid again. However, the knight was completely serious when she confessed that she wanted to kiss her husband one last time. The Duke was very surprised that the girl had any feelings for him. She admitted that this was not true, but it still seemed a little unfair to die without ever kissing her husband one last time. She said that the 3 seconds they touched lips at the wedding did not count as a normal kiss. She promised that she would not tell anyone about this, and the secret would remain between them. The Duke was saddened and asked the girl not to pretend that she liked him. However, he still lifted his wife carefully, trying not to hurt her. The young man promised that this kiss would not be their last, after which he gently touched her lips with his own. Yona tried to think of something she might regret at the end of her life, but nothing came to mind. The girl decided that there was no better ending for her. However, if circumstances had turned out differently, she would have liked to try to live with the Duke in a happy marriage. At that moment, her heart stopped and her bloody arm hung at her side. The Duke immediately guessed that his wife had not simply lost consciousness, but had passed away from this life. He began to frantically call her by name, but the girl did not answer, because she was already in a completely different place. There, someone also loudly called her name, and then irritably hit the table with his fist to attract the girl's attention. It was only at this moment that Yona shuddered, because she had not expected a change in the situation. At first, she didn't understand where she was, or how she got there. Count Harold shouted at the girl, and did not understand how she dared to be distracted right in front of him. Her father had died several years ago, so the girl assumed that she had gone to hell, although she imagined the underworld a little differently. Although she was not surprised, because a sinner like her could not even dream of a place in heaven. The girl stated that her father was such a notorious asshole that this outcome was the most likely for him. She stated that the man had settled in well, and even looked a little younger. The man was furious at such an insult, because the girl had never said anything like that to his face before. He jumped up from his seat and raised his hand to slap her. However, Yona was a trained knight and easily twisted the man, slamming his face into the table. She stated that the man who betrayed all his vows and had an affair on the side did not dare call her a bitch. She couldn't believe that he still had the nerve to call her names. The man broke free from his grip and tried to hit the girl, because she did not dare open her mouth towards the one who raised her all these years. Yona easily dodged his blows, while simultaneously delivering her own to the man. At some point, she tripped it up and it crashed down on the table at full speed, breaking it and smashing everything that was on it. Yona said that the words about the man raising her all these years only apply to his other children. The man was not even aware that it was she who became the head of the family after him. The girl added that his poor son and daughter did not even have time to understand that they were dying. The man did not understand what she was talking about, because the girl had just gotten into a high position and decided that she could do anything. He added that she was able to become the crown prince's bodyguard only because he used his influence. It was only at this point that Richard's former title before ascending the throne caught the girl's attention. Yona was an illegitimate child who was taken in by the Count simply because she had a talent for wielding weapons. The Count wanted to secure the support of the future ruler in advance, but without leaving any particular traces of his influence. So he chose a girl, an illegitimate child, as a gift for the crown prince. He raised the girl in captivity, hiding her from prying eyes, tempering her character with cruel training. If Yona did something wrong, he would starve her and beat her. A simple child would not be able to bear this extreme cruelty. However, she somehow managed to grow into the perfect pawn for the emperor. Only after her father's words did the girl begin to think that everything that was happening seemed too real to her. She noticed that her father looked younger, and the chandelier, which she personally replaced with a more fashionable one, remained in place. So Yona asked the man what year it was and how old she was. The man was angry at her question and believed that her ambitions for marrying the Duke had blinded her to the point of losing her memory. Yona walked over to the nearest mirror and saw that the scar mark on her face was no longer there. Besides, the wound she received in the last battle simply disappeared. From all this, the girl concluded that she had returned to the past. Because of the noise, her half-brother Niels and half-sister Yvonne ran into the room. They immediately rushed to their father and assumed that someone had attacked him. Yona was unhappy that she had returned to the past, and now she would have to watch the disgusting family again. Unexpectedly, for everyone gathered, she laughed loudly and could not stop for some time. The brother and sister thought the girl was crazy, since she even attacked their father. However, Yona was not happy with this assumption and suggested that the young man find out for himself why the man was on the floor. Niels was furious and wanted the girl to watch her language. She reminded him that she and her father needed to better watch their manners and show due respect to the personal knight of the imperial family. The brother didn't know what the girl was doing, because she was a lowly brat. He walked up to the girl and hit her in the face with all his might. This time, Yona decided not to dodge and realized that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Niels declared that they had been too kind to her and that she had dared to raise her hand against her father and, in addition, had been insolent to him. Yvonne noticed that the girl had become too unbridled because recently she had ignored her and had not given out the prince's schedule. Niels asked his sister not to worry because he promised to teach the girl a lesson and break her leg. Just like last time, Yona remembered very well that about a year ago, while hunting, Niels had shot her with a gun. The girl swore to herself that he would never have such a chance again. She looked straight into her brother's face, and he became even more furious, intending to hit her again. However, this time, Yona didn't stand and wait for the blow. She attacked him first. The girl dealt the young man such a powerful blow that her brother flew back several meters and fell to the floor. Having come to his senses a little, he noticed that, because of this blow, he had lost most of his front teeth. The young man immediately ran to the fireplace and was about to take the weapon from the wall. However, Yona was not afraid, and was even pleased that the young man wanted to draw his sword against her. She stated that if he was going to take someone else's life, he had to be prepared to put his own on the line. Yona wanted Niels to take responsibility for his actions, so she threw the gauntlet in his face. The young man didn't want to admit it, but his sister was a very gifted swordswoman. If he encountered her now, the girl would calmly cut off any of his limbs. The young man understood perfectly well that Yona could easily deprive him of his head, but he still reached for the glove in fear. He wanted to raise her and accept the challenge, but his father forbade him to do so. Yona was pleased that someone in this company still had their brains in place. The Count approached his own child, forbidding him to take even a step to the side. The girl said that she had retreated too many times to continue to obey them all. Besides, Yona remembered that the day was approaching when she was supposed to meet the Duke. The girl was wondering how many days it would be before they saw each other for the first time. so she first got rid of all the maids who were spying on her. Yona dismissed everyone, saying that the Count's messengers had given themselves away. The girl knew that after their last meeting, her father would behave well for some time. Yona understood why she had returned to this particular moment in time, and why this had happened to her. She never wanted to be reborn. But if she could see the Duke again, that would be great. The girl closed her eyes, and couldn't wait for the moment when she could finally meet her husband from her past life. 2 days later, Yona went to the headquarters of the Imperial Knights, and did not know how to behave when she met the Duke. She wondered why he came to her aid. Whether he really just didn't want to become a widower early. She wanted to know what happened to him after her death. Whether he survived or died. Meeting the Duke wasn't that difficult. They were supposed to see each other soon anyway. Yona wasn't going to act recklessly, so she decided to just wait. She realized that she could still feel the warmth on her lips from their kiss. The girl promised that she must definitely thank the one who was ready to rush into battle for her. In the meantime, Yona went to the commander of the Knights, Saskia, who had already summoned her to her. The commander saw the wound on the girl's face and decided that for certain reasons, it would be better for her to stay at the bureau today. She added that the Crown Prince had summoned the girl to him as soon as she arrived. Yona was taken aback by this statement and immediately felt the oppressive atmosphere. Saskia knew that Yona only used makeup to cover up new wounds and abrasions. Each time she did it very badly, and anyone who saw her would also understand what was going on. Saskia was sure that this was Neil's doing, but she couldn't do anything about it. She simply stated that no matter how insignificant the boy felt compared to his younger sister, he was going too far, and the girl should not endure humiliation. She added that if Yona showed up here again with a new bruise, she would challenge Niels to a duel. In high society, there is nothing more shameful than an illegitimate child, and the Count was well aware of this. So he forged Yona's documents, declaring her to be the child of distant relatives. Therefore, many believed that the Count simply adopted her. Because of this, no one questions the Count's attitude towards her. The girl stated that Niels did not even accept her challenge, so he definitely would not behave like that in front of the commander. Saskia ignored it at first, but was then surprised that Yona had finally challenged her brother to a duel. However, the girl did not want to go into details, so she asked permission to go to the prince. Already on the way out, she ran into another subordinate, who was surprised by her appearance. Finally, Saskia stated that no one except Yona behaves so brazenly with their commander. However, the girl only smiled and stated that no one else could have even said a word in her place. The young man saw a bruise on the girl's cheek, but Saskia distracted him, ordering him to stop thinking about it. Theodore was annoyed, because no one liked the fact that the girl was beaten by her relatives again, and she would soon become a duchess. Saskia noticed that those who are used to looking down on other people really don't like being surpassed. However, even she was very interested in why the Crown Prince had called the girl to him this time. The maid informed Yona that His Highness had just fallen asleep, so she was asked to wait here or come later. The girl chose to wait, so she entered the room and knelt down in front of her master's bed. She noted that if His Highness was tired, it would be better to postpone her visit until next time. Richard rose slowly, displeased that his impatient knight had interrupted his master's sleep with her words. He immediately reported that he had heard that Yona had knocked out Niels's front teeth, but the girl said that it was just a rumor. The Crown Prince immediately realized that she was being disingenuous, so he demanded that she tell him only the truth. Yona couldn't resist those words, for Richard was not the lord she desired, but she obeyed his orders impeccably. All her life, the girl was just a pawn in his game, and therefore behaved submissively in order to survive. Yona never sought his recognition, never expected praise. But there was one thing she wanted to ask him. She wondered where he was when the Duke rushed onto the battlefield to rescue the wife he had been forced into marriage with. She wondered if the Emperor was unable to save her, or if he simply did not want to do so. She wanted to know if he had any justification, or if he had simply betrayed her and used her all her life. Yona reported that she struck her brother in the jaw with the fist in response to a conflict he started first. The Crown Prince asked whether this conflict was connected with her upcoming marriage. The young man reached forward and touched the girl's wounded cheek, forcing her to raise her head. He stated that if she was against this marriage, she only had to say so, and it would be immediately cancelled. Yona decided that Richard was talking to her as if he was truly sincere. The girl remembered that in the past, he had asked her the same question, wanting to test her loyalty in this way. Then Yona bowed her head before him and declared that she would do whatever His Highness ordered. Richard noticed that the girl was always like this and always ready to follow his orders. Yona then promised that this would never change, after which she was congratulated on her future marriage. This time, the girl thanked Richard for his concern and stated that she really liked her future groom. The young man was surprised by her answer and bit his lip in annoyance. He announced that Yona could go free, but the girl was surprised that there was no matter of great importance. Richard added that her fiancé would be arriving today, so he wanted to introduce them to each other first. The girl was very surprised when she heard that the Duke was coming to the capital today. Looking at Yona's face, Richard changed his mind, because she shouldn't show up to the first meeting with such a bruise. Yona completely forgot about it because she didn't think it was that important. After this, the girl rose from her knees and said goodbye to Richard, thanking him for the time he had spent with her. At the same time, someone was cursing from the outer courtyard of the Imperial Garden. Thomas considered this disrespectful, since they could have at least sent a servant for them. The Duke believed that they could walk there on their own. Otherwise, they would feel that they were being closely watched. However, he immediately added that a guide would not have bothered them, because in his presence, Thomas would definitely not have screamed throughout the garden. The Duke literally heard Thomas swearing at him, and did not understand how the master could be so sarcastic towards someone who had served him faithfully for so many years. However, this sudden political marriage put him in a very unpleasant and precarious position. No one could have imagined that the head of the barely recovered Han clan would be greeted in the palace in such a way. Throughout history, the Han family had a very close friendship with their neighbors, the Earl of Shire, who decided to marry their children to link the two clans. Even so, the Duke treated his bride as a childhood friend, not as a lover. However, 7 years ago, disaster struck when the Earl of Shire's family was suddenly declared traitors to the homeland for their connections with a foreign country. After several secret documents were revealed and were considered evidence of treason, the entire family was executed without warning, which tainted the Han family as well. Since the ruling dynasty suspected them of treason due to the friendship between the families, under the pretext of an investigation, they confiscated all lands, real estate, and property, and imprisoned close relatives. And then the Duke's parents died in an accident. Of course, no one thought it was an accident, but these events led to the collapse of the family. In one moment, the young man lost his parents and his good name. And he also lost the one who was supposed to become his bride in the future. The young man worked tirelessly to restore the good name of a family with whom no one else wanted to have anything to do. And so, just as he had finally firmly established himself in England, he was stunned by bad news. Yona, the one whom the people called the Crown Prince's faithful hound, was to become his bride. It was immediately clear that through this marriage, the Crown Prince wanted to take the Duke on a short leash, but it was not clear what benefit this would bring to the girl herself. Thomas continued to swear and say that the prince would regret treating them like that. Suddenly, the Duke ordered his assistant to be silent, because someone was approaching them. Khan hoped the man hadn't heard Thomas's chatter. However, he was very surprised when the next second, Yona herself, his future bride, appeared from afar. The girl seemed very cheerful as she ran up to the young man to greet him. She bowed her head and formally introduced herself as a member of the Imperial Guard. The Duke even thought that the girl smiled, but he did not expect to see her so soon. Yona was surprised that she had met the Duke somewhere before. The young man explained that he doesn't visit the capital very often, so the girl could have been mistaken. After this, there was an awkward pause in the dialogue between them, because both did not know what to talk about. Yona was a little sad, but still apologized to the young man for disturbing him at such an inopportune time. However, she officially offered to accompany the Duke to the prince's palace. Khan refused, because he knew the way there quite well, and besides, he did not want to distract the girl from more important matters. Yona looked upset as she added that she didn't have any important tasks right now. However, Thomas pushed his master forward along the road, leaving the girl behind. Before returning to her business, Yona saluted the Duke and wished him a good journey. Even Thomas noticed that the girl turned out to be much kinder than he had been told. Now that Yona saw that the Duke was alive and well, she felt better. But it was noticeable how the man became wary in her presence. She remembered his words about her and the Emperor, which the man told her shortly before his death. Yona knew that the Crown Prince trusted her, but she wasn't sure that he liked her. When the rebels, hiding in the crowd, broke through to the palace, an uprising broke out. To break through this crowd, a powerful barrier was needed. Yona was standing at the corner of the tower when she received a message from the Emperor. At that time, His Majesty ordered the girl and the soldiers of the 1st Division to remain in place. Even Yona was shocked that she had been abandoned to cover the Emperor's own retreat. Soon the girl's carriage drove up to her house, where the Count was already waiting on the threshold. The man asked where the girl had been all this time, but she walked past and had no intention of answering him. The Count ran after Yona, afraid that rumors would spread if she went to see the Emperor in such a state. The girl only sighed, because she realized that the rumor that her brother had hit her had already spread. The Count heard that Yona had been managing without even a maid since she had fired everyone, and this was unacceptable for the Count's daughter. The man continued to scold the girl, but soon became furious that she did not listen to him. He thought that Yona was so offended by her brother that she was now ready to do anything just to tarnish the honor of their family. The girl stopped, turned around, and said that they could hit anyone with it, as long as rumors didn't spread. She suggested that if she removed all traces of beatings from her face and body, it would restore the family's honor. Yona was furious and asked the Count to think about which of them was bringing more shame on the family. The man was frightened by Yona's sudden outburst because she had never answered him like that before. The girl sighed and reminded that it was her brother who had put her in such an awkward position. In 2 days, she is supposed to meet her fiancé, but the bride's face bears the mark of a blow. The Count knew that if the girl showed up to the meeting with such a bruise, the Duke could use this pretext and break off the engagement. In this case, the Emperor's plan would be disrupted. The Count could not allow this, so it was necessary to find a different approach to the girl. He understood that Yona was angry with Niels, but he reminded him that his brother could sometimes be harsh and impatient. He added that family members should always support and cover each other. However, when she behaves like this, it becomes very difficult for them, because Yona even drove away all the maids. The man believed that she was clearly uncomfortable living alone now, so he was worried about her. The man, under Yona's watchful gaze, admitted that he had behaved incorrectly, which was why they had misunderstood each other, and then apologized. After this, the girl was satisfied and smiled, noting that her father did not need to apologize to her. She added that it was her brother who hit her, so he personally should ask her for forgiveness. Even though she knocked out his teeth, she still decided that the person who committed the offense should admit his guilt, after which they could have a normal conversation. The father hoped that if Niels apologized to the girl, she would forgive him and find herself servants. Yona promised that this is exactly what would happen as soon as her brother apologized to her. A little later, she went to the Count's office and calmly drank tea there, waiting for her brother to appear. Soon the man literally forced his son to come and apologize to the girl. The Count noted that this was only an apology, and that Niels was obliged to apologize. Otherwise, he would be changed in the will to his sister. Only these arguments worked on the young man, after which he finally resigned himself to the inevitable. The young man looked at his sister and apologized to her. Under his father's watchful gaze, Niels admitted that he should not have raised his hand to the girl. After this, the Count stated that now Yona could apologize to her brother, and they would forget about what happened. She smiled and admitted that she didn't mean to do that, but apologized for the pain she caused, because she should have dodged better, and besides, the guy started it first. This apology made Niels even more angry, because he immediately understood what it was referring to. These were his own words, which he said to the girl last time, sitting on the sofa in the same way. The young man became furious, because he thought that his sister was making fun of him again. He lost his temper and was about to hit the girl for making fun of him. However, the Count shouted, demanding that his son stop immediately. The man ordered the boy to keep his mouth shut if he didn't want to disappoint him even more. The Count reminded that Niels was the eldest and should have a head on his shoulders and not yell at the girl. The young man was amazed, because his father had never spoken to him like that. The Count demanded that the quarrel be stopped immediately and did not understand why the boy could behave so disgustingly in the presence of his younger brothers. Yona knew that if she continued to mock him, her brother might burst into tears, and she would be sick from the sight of him. That's why she asked her father to stop swearing, because her brother had already learned his lesson. She decided to have mercy and forget about what happened, and also announced that she would deal with her maids herself. The Count was amazed, because the girl had just agreed to hire a servant for herself. Yona stated that she was not taking back her words, but would simply personally select those who would work for her. The girl was so absorbed in other matters that she didn't even have time to think about a personal maid. The Count was right. It is indecent for a lady of high society not to have servants, so you need to choose a person you can trust. The girl thought about the only person she could trust in her childhood. At that time, she was still a very small child who was constantly beaten by her elders. She told the maid that usually no one cared what state her room was in. Suddenly, the maid asked if the mistress ever dreamed of leaving this place. Having heard a negative answer, The girl immediately and decisively headed towards the window. She opened the curtains wide, letting sunlight into the room. The maid noted that if the girl intended to live in this room, it needed to be made to look like a home. The butler knocked on the door and announced that he had arrived to listen to the lady's wishes. Yona said that several years ago, when the countess died, one of the maids was sent to work in a remote estate, after which she demanded that she be returned. Yona was fully prepared to go out when a servant named Maria arrived. The girl formally introduced herself and was very glad to see her mistress, whom she had not seen for a long time. The heroine wanted to talk to the girl, so she invited her to sit down at the table. She thought Maria was surprised when Yona suddenly called her to the main building. She announced that the position of personal maid was currently open, and she would like Maria to become it. The girl admitted that she understood it right away, because the mistress had no other servants. However, she was surprised when she learned that she would be the only one serving personally. Yona just smiled at her words and stated that she didn't need any extra enemies. Maria heard that Yona was engaged to the Duke, and even the wives of barons have at least 2 maids. Yona promised to hire more servants when you get married, and there are a couple of months left before the wedding, so Maria has to manage on her own. Although the maid was leading to a different conclusion, she resigned herself to it, because Yona had not changed much over the past time. The girl added that she had already informed the butler, and he would soon inform the count himself about the girl's appointment. Maria was afraid that the girl's father would not allow her to work in this house. However, Yona didn't care about his opinion, because she had already decided to hire the girl. After these words, Maria realized that she was mistaken, and that Milady had grown a lot during their separation. Yona knew that Maria had not received any promotions because she lacked skills. In fact, the girl was simply abrupt and not always attentive, and in addition, she wasn't a very good cook. However, she was the only one who took care of the girl, washed and bandaged her wounds. Therefore, she soon fell out of favor with the count, who moved her out of sight. In fact, only Maria dared to express her opinion about the upcoming marriage, because in the past, Yona often suffered ridicule and inappropriate attitudes from outsiders. Maria was always angry when she heard that her lady's loyalty to the emperor was again not properly recognized. Yona always felt sad at such moments, and Maria said that you always need to think about yourself first. Only after some time did Yona realize how right the girl was. However, at the time, the lady did not follow this advice. After all, she never had the strength to escape from a family in which no one loved her, and from a master who did not appreciate her loyalty. It was only in her final moments, when she was saved by a man who had every right to hate her, that Yona promised she would not make the same mistake twice. That's why she decided to change and not allow anyone to treat her like that anymore. The girl knew it was already quite late, but she still wanted to confess something. She sincerely thanked the maid for always being there to comfort her. Maria didn't remember doing anything out of the ordinary. Yona explained that she had never valued herself, and the maid's words that time seemed to breathe new life into her. So the girl vowed that she would no longer be as spineless as before, and would value herself. After these words, Maria burst into tears, because she was so glad that her mistress finally understood her worth. The count did not oppose the girl's decision to return Maria. Until the wedding, he decided to remain as quiet as a mouse and as low as grass. So, in the daily hustle and bustle, the day of the official meeting with the Duke arrived unnoticed. The girl found it funny that the count thought he would benefit from her wedding. The man probably thought that this would strengthen his relationship with the imperial family. Maria admitted that she was very surprised when she heard that it was the imperial family that was giving the girl away in marriage. So far, it was only an engagement. But Maria was worried that the count had decided to keep the girl by his side until old age. The maid was glad that her mistress was now engaged, and hoped that the groom would be suitable for her. Soon the look for the meeting was complete, and Yona was simply gorgeous. The girls left the room and intended to meet the Duke, but Ivan was waiting for them in the corridor. The sister said that Yona's outfit would definitely make a lasting impression on the Duke, because it was so plain and pitiful. The girl was furious at her sister's makeup, because even after putting on makeup, she still looked terrible. Yona ordered the maid to go and fetch her sword, which frightened her sister. Ivan noticed that first Yona knocked out all of her brother's teeth, and now she was targeting her. She reminded that a knight should not raise his hand against a girl, but she forgot that Yona herself was a girl. The heroine took a few steps forward, after which Ivan could not stand it and screamed throughout the house that such a vulgar scum did not dare come near her. She screamed that Yona had no right to insult her with these terrible words. Meanwhile, the Duke watched what was happening from the first floor, because the Count was unable to stop him. The Count was amazed that the Duke had arrived so early, since they had expected him later. Khan asked to be excused for arriving 10 minutes before the appointed time, although in fact, he had arrived even earlier and was simply waiting. The Duke knew it was very impolite to arrive so early when the hosts had not yet completed their preparations, although Thomas was not pleased. The assistant wanted them to just go inside and wait at home, rather than sit in the carriage. All this time, the Duke did not want to admit it, but in fact he was very much looking forward to this meeting. The Count was just about to escort the groom to his adopted daughter when shouts were heard. Yvonne blamed Yona for destroying their family, and now she was pretending to be an innocent lamb, although she should have been on her knees begging for forgiveness. Yvonne believed that it was because of her that they did not see their mother's last moments. Yona understood perfectly well that every time Yvonne wanted to humiliate her, she remembered this. The Countess died 5 years ago, and in the last minutes of her life, she wanted to see only one person next to her. This man was not her own husband or her own children. Just before her death, the Countess wanted to see her husband's illegitimate daughter, Yona, so much. The girl sincerely apologized for the fact that her sister did not hear her mother's last words. At this point, she considered the conversation over, turned around, and walked away. The Count felt embarrassed that the Duke had witnessed this scene of quarrel between the sisters. He tried to pretend that Yvonne was simply jealous of her sister's upcoming engagement to the Duke. He tried to convince the guests that the girls usually behaved decently, but today they were very nervous. Khan did not expect his bride to come from a well-bred family, but this was beyond the pale. Sometimes family members don't get along with each other, but these guys just openly insult the girl. And in her own home, they treated her like trash all this time. The Count apologized for the long wait and offered to call Yona, but this was not necessary, because by this moment, the girl was already descending the stairs to greet her future husband. She apologized to the Duke for the forced delay, and he could not take his eyes off her. She was so beautiful. The young man was very pleased to meet him and remarked that he should apologize for arriving so early. The Duke carefully took the girl's hand and brought it to his lips to kiss it gently. Yona smiled and admitted that she, too, had been counting the days until they met. The young man realized that the girl was telling the truth from her look. He didn't understand why she was giving him such a warm welcome, since they hadn't met before. The Duke decided for himself that his future wife was a real woman of mystery. The Count was glad that the pleasant man and the beauty looked simply magnificent next to each other. However, Yona interrupted him and suggested that the young man go out into the fresh air. The Duke remarked that the weather was wonderful, so he did not mind taking a walk. When the carriage was ready, the young people sat down opposite each other and did not know how to start the conversation. Yona admitted that she would like to go to a secluded place because there were too many extra ears and eyes around. She admitted that she insisted on meeting in the suburbs because she wanted to discuss with the Duke things that were not intended for outsiders. She clarified that it was not about a message from the Crown Prince, but simply personal matters. The Duke was a little irritated that he had to literally pull everything out of the girl with pliers. However, he had come to terms with the fact that Yona was not ready to continue the conversation until the atmosphere was right. At this point, their argument ended, and the girl looked sadly out the window, and the Duke could look at her. He tried to get to know his bride better, and was surprised when he noticed something. Even though the girl was wearing makeup, you could still see the trace of a bruise. Khan knew that the non-recognition of an illegitimate child's talents was not a particularly rare occurrence in these circles. However, the young man assumed that the girl had been bullied since early childhood. If this was not hidden even from an outsider, it means that many people knew about what was happening, and the Crown Prince simply preferred not to pay attention. Even during his first conversation with Richard, the Duke noticed that there was no one who did not know how much the prince respected Lady Yona. The man said that the girl was loyal, like a dog, but she was truly dear to him. The Khan noted that giving a girl dear to the prince to another man was quite a cruel joke. He reminded her that after the wedding, Yona would become a duchess, and it was a bit much to bestow such a title on a simple mistress. The Crown Prince had no intention of making the relationship between them public, so the Duke did not have to worry about the honor of the newly formed family. He reminded that for the Duke, who wanted to restore the former greatness of his clan, this would only play into his hands. He would gain the support of the future emperor. After these words, the Duke was furious, but he could not say anything to Richard. The prince strongly recommended that the young man live with the girl as he had before marriage, and not even think about taking her virginity. He noted that he didn't care at all how Han would treat her within the family. However, despite the whole situation, the prince was still the owner. If he wanted to marry his little dog, It would only be to someone who wouldn't lay a finger on her. Richard hoped that the Duke would not tempt fate and take what was his. At that moment, animal lust was reflected in his eyes, and the prince used the Khan as a chain to keep the girl from going far from him. When the Duke recalled that conversation with the prince, he could immediately guess what exactly Yona wanted to tell him. The young man understood perfectly well that she would want to immediately draw a line in their future relationship. After some time, the young people finally reached a secluded place and got out of the carriage to talk. The girl needed some time, but first of all, she asked the Duke to listen to her calmly. Yona proposed to the young man and promised that she would make him happy if he married her. At first, the young man was stunned, and then was very embarrassed when he saw that Yona was picking flowers. The girl presented the young man with a rose and promised that she would definitely make him happy. The young man had no idea what was going on in her head at that moment. Judging by the look in her eyes, she spoke from the heart when she proposed to marry her. Khan accepted the flower and reminded her that the girl did not remember their first meeting. He wondered if the bride really liked him after seeing him only twice. Yona was a little embarrassed and asked him not to misunderstand her, because she was not confessing her feelings to him. The girl understood that the Duke might take such a proposal as humiliating, but she hoped that their life together would not be overshadowed by this. She promised that even though it might not be easy, she would do everything possible to make sure they were happy together. Yona knew that many saw their upcoming marriage as a unification of the Duke's and Emperor's families. In fact, the young man simply bowed his head to the will of the prince. Just because Yona is the prince's confidant, the young man was forced into marriage with a woman of lower status than he. However, as a wife, the girl could bring him as much benefit as she could. And all this is so that in the eyes of society, their marriage is considered extremely beneficial for his family. In this way, the Duke will be able to turn the whole situation in his favor and increase the influence of his clan. In reality, it won't be true, but only the parties involved will know about it. Therefore, Yona promised that she would become the head of her family, and that in the event of a divorce, the Duke would receive the title of the clan, which had been part of the history of the state for 200 years. In addition, he will receive property and part of their real estate as compensation. The young man was surprised that the girl wanted to head her family. She stated that she was not seeking to obtain a loud title and was not particularly eager to appropriate the property of the heirs, but only wanted to provide the Duke with a decent life. Khan was furious that the girl could have come up with something more convincing if she wanted to deceive him so much. Yona didn't expect the man to believe her right away, but she didn't dare lie in front of the man she would soon swear allegiance to. She didn't need any reward or recognition from her husband. She did this only because she made this decision herself and once promised to prove how serious her words were. Although she spoke of loyalty, the Duke could not believe that the girl was going against the will of the prince, her master, and contradicting herself. However, he didn't understand why her words sounded so sincere in that case. Yona stated that she was already more devoted to Prince Richard than she deserved, so she did not build up false hopes that she would one day be disappointed in her husband as well. She stated that the Duke might change his mind about her after she sacrificed everything for him. The young man could not understand what was happening. Was the girl really not acting according to the prince's orders? However, if Richard really wanted to send a spy into his family, he would have chosen a girl with a cleaner past for this purpose. He wouldn't tell the Duke that he was in a relationship with Yona. The Duke suggested that the girl had become disillusioned with the prince after he decided to marry her off to another. He knew that a heart as straight as an arrow would sooner break than change. For her, showing the prince her successful life is a form of revenge, but Yona could have chosen a less shocking way to convince him. The girl had served the prince for a long time, so the Duke's distrust of her was quite natural. After all, it is her responsibility to show that she means business. She stated that loyalty is not one of those feelings that can be one-sided. So Yona asked how long it would take for the Duke to believe her words. After the conversation ended, the couple returned to their assistants, and Maria immediately tried to tidy up the lady's hair. Thomas immediately approached the Duke and tried to find out what they were talking about. Unexpectedly, Khan asked what a man should answer when a girl herself proposes and promises to provide for everything. Thomas was very surprised by this question and did not understand whether Yona had really made such an offer. He also assumed that the girl had gone crazy since she was behaving so strangely. He didn't understand why she was doing this for no reason, since they were seeing each other for the second time in their lives. However, the Duke reminded that in fact they had met before. But for some reason, Lady Yona did not remember their meeting. It was a long time ago. Their meeting was fleeting, so it was not surprising that she did not remember it. However, Thomas teased his master because the young man remembered this moment very well. Soon Maria's work was finished, and Yona could return to her fiancé. The Duke noticed that they had not chosen the best setting for their conversation, so he suggested that they go back into the house and continue. But Yona suggested ending the meeting, since the Duke needed time to think about her proposal. Khan thought it would be nice to learn at least something about each other, and there was no better way to do this than through conversation. The girl noted that if the young man was worried that he would be judged for such a short meeting, then she was planning to return in the evening anyway. The Duke had no intention of sending the lady home alone, for he did not want to give the impression of a barbarian who had no idea of good manners. Yona was genuinely surprised when she realized that Han was going to go to the city with her. The Duke did not understand why he needed to come up with schemes and split up for a simple meeting. Then, Yona admitted that she wanted to look into a place that was not appropriate for the status of a young man. The Duke reminded her that the lady had decided to be honest with him, so she should not have hidden the truth. Although Yona was unhappy about this, she still admitted that she was planning to visit the entertainment street. The young man immediately realized that this was a notorious area of debauchery and gambling. He even suggested that Yona really enjoyed having fun in such places and enjoyed the attention of the male sex. He immediately understood why the girl didn't want them to go there together. However, Yona asked her fiancé not to worry because she did not intend to meet men there. She admitted that she needed a woman, after which the Duke had even more questions for his bride. The Count is a selfish and very ambitious man, but his worst quality is his views on marriage. In his youth, he had many mistresses, but even after marriage, he constantly had affairs on the side. It is not surprising that he had an illegitimate child, perhaps even more than one. After the death of his wife, the Count went on a rampage. His current lover was called Fleur. She was on everyone's lips, and it was to her that the heroes went. The girl worked and lived on a street that belonged to the Forbidden Pleasures district. The Duke and Yona changed into ordinary clothes and watched the Fleur from afar. The girl noted that if the Khan was uncomfortable, he could simply wait for her in a place convenient for him. The young man had already prepared himself mentally and was not going to back down, so he resolutely followed the girl. Yona added that no one knows where they went, because it is better to keep the meeting with her father's mistress a secret. The Duke did not understand why the girl needed this, especially on such a day. Yona knew that this kind of meeting, where the man she was engaged to would be present, was unacceptable, but at least the alibi would be ironclad. They continued to follow the Fleur, and Yona noticed that they would be there very soon. The Duke wondered why the girl needed to pursue her father's mistress at all. Yona chose not to elaborate on this, and said briefly that it was for the Duke's sake. She added that the young man would understand everything when they went inside. Soon the girl knocked on the door of the house where Fleur lived. The woman opened the door in a rage and started swearing, because she thought it was her assistant who had come. She was very surprised when, instead of a girl, she saw her lover's daughter in front of her. There was chaos all around, and Fleur declared that it was extremely rude for a knight to appear without warning. The woman assumed that Yona had come to her to ask her to break off relations with her father. Fleur immediately added that she had absolutely no intention of doing this. Yona immediately indicated that it was better to keep this conversation a secret, since the anniversary of the Countess's death would soon be here. However, the girl didn't care about this at all, because she only cared about what could affect her life. Yona noted that if her father's mistress showed up at such an event and made a scene, it would be extremely humiliating for her children, and her father would not tolerate it. Fleur was angry at the girl for her words and did not understand why she was telling her this. Suddenly, Yona put a bag of money on the table and declared that it was compensation. She added that if Fleur and her father's relationship ended, she would double the amount. The mistress could not believe her eyes, because there was an incredibly huge amount of money lying on the table. She couldn't believe that all she had to do was cause a scandal on the anniversary of the Countess's death, and all of this would be hers. She stated that picking up a rich man was not an easy task, and this amount would not be enough. Yona reminded that her father never stays with the same woman for long, and they have been together for about a year. This meant that the girl had nothing more to get out of the Count, and she had to not miss her chance. The Count is not particularly generous with his women. Otherwise, Fleur would not live in this hovel as a woman of low status. Yona reminded him that soon her father would find himself a new toy, because there were a whole bunch of ladies ready to take that place. The girl added that it is unlikely that her father only sees one Fleur. The mistress immediately understood why this old man came to her so rarely lately. She realized that he had already found a replacement for her and would soon abandon her himself. She asked whether she would really get twice as much money if she broke up with the Count. The woman was about to count the money, but decided to clarify what benefit his daughter would receive. Yona noted that breaking off the affair would only benefit both her father and his entire family. But the mistress just laughed and noted that the Count really did have one smart child. When Fleur throws a tantrum on the anniversary of the Countess's death, Niels and Yvonne throw her out. But their anger will not be directed at the mistress, but at the father himself. They will immediately remember how he had fun with his mistresses while their mother lay on her deathbed. This was exactly Yona's plan, which she thought through and developed for a long time. The Duke asked the girl if she was really determined to become the head of her family. Yona knew she had to use this chance to ruin her brother's relationship with their father. Khan noticed that this was too risky a strategy that she was carrying out for him, so he had a hard time believing it. Yona noticed that he intended to refuse her for fear of handing over power to a pawn of his enemy. The Duke did not understand why the girl needed all this, why she would betray her master and come up with complex schemes. Yona admitted that she simply realized too late that the one to whom she swore allegiance was not worthy of it. The Khan became convinced that the girl was really acting this way because the prince had betrayed her. He couldn't believe that until now he had been convinced that a girl could love a man who openly declared that their relationship would always be secret. Only now did he realize that she was ready to ruin her life just to spite the traitor. The Duke stated that in this case, the girl would do well to think things over again and more carefully choose the companion to whom she would devote her entire life. Yona declared that even if she had all the time in the world, she would still choose the Duke. She was ready to do this, even if he himself did not trust her one bit. She didn't care whether he called her the Crown Prince's mutt or a dirty spy. However, Yona was sure that the Duke was not the kind of man who could hand over his wife. Khan remembered their conversation at the lake and asked how much money the girl wanted to demand from him to prove his trust. She stated that 100,000 gold would be enough, because if her plan failed, the Duke would lose nothing. She explained that her family would leave her the same amount as a dowry, so she was only putting her own value at stake. Yvonne was furious that Yona had found common ground with the Duke and would soon become his wife. She took out her anger on her maids and declared that she would not let it go so easily. Yvonne felt that the servants looked down on her, since it was not she who would become a duchess, but her sister. The maids tried to calm the girl down, but it didn't help. She threw dishes at them. Yvonne thought that Yona was a bitch who used to keep her mouth shut, and after the engagement, pretended that she didn't know her sister at all. The Count recently scolded his daughter for making a scene in front of the Duke. In the heat of an argument, the man said that the girl was disgracing their entire family. Yvonne believed that if he hadn't brought that crap into the house, this wouldn't have happened. However, the Count did not want to hear this nonsense any longer, because he needed to return to his guests. Yvonne couldn't stand it any longer and screamed that it was her father's fault that the engagement had taken place at all. The Count was furious and disappointed that both his children had become complete nobodies. Yvonne sat in her own house as if in a cage, and Yona walked freely wherever she wanted. The girl was very happy to see her brother, who came to her room secretly from her father. The girl said that she was very sad and hurt by what happened. Niels said that the Duke had said nothing, but he had no interest in Yona either, since this engagement had taken place by order of the Imperial family. The brother noted that there was no need to worry, but leaving everything as is also not an option. He wanted to use Yona when she became a duchess, but now the girl simply disgraced the family and nothing more. The brother grabbed his sister and declared that she should become the duchess. Yvonne didn't like this situation at all, but even she didn't believe it was possible. Niels said he had a plan, because if the bride suddenly disappeared, another family member would take her place. If everything goes according to plan, they will kill two birds with one stone. He believed that if they killed Yona, there might be a lot of noise, but it was nothing compared to their benefit. He thought that using this brat to restore their family's status was a huge mistake from the start. It was only at this moment that the young man noticed that the maids were still in the room, so he turned and ordered them to leave. The poor girls were frightened and whispering as soon as they got outside, but one of them immediately understood what she had to do. Yona knew that the wedding was coming soon, and she had a lot of things to do. The girl was happy that she would soon leave her service, but in the past, she did not even want to think about it and worked day and night. At that moment, someone knocked on the door of the room, and the girl decided that it was Maria who had come to visit her. However, from the hesitation of the man behind the door, Yona realized that this was not her maid. The girl quickly approached the door and saw a maid trembling with fear and beaten behind it. The heroine immediately realized that it was her sister's maid, but she did not understand what she was doing near her room. The girl ran into the room and immediately apologized for such a late visit. The maid reported that, although it was hard to believe, Niels and Yvonne wanted to seriously harm their half-sister. Yona immediately realized that everything was serious, so she asked him to tell her the details. The maid overheard their conversation, in which they discussed how to get rid of their sister and send Lady Yvonne down the aisle. All the maids were thrown out of the room, so the girl did not know any more details. Yona was pleased, because she had finally managed to get her brother and sister angry. The maid admitted that she did not want to participate in this abomination and take the blame, and most of the maids agreed with her. The young lady could imagine how they all did not want to become part of the brother and sister's plans. Knowing their personalities, it was easy to understand that they were both extremely cruel to the servants. But until this moment, none of the servants had approached her, even when she found herself in a similar situation. The girl believed that in her past life, the maids did not see her as a person ready to protect them. But now she has changed, and people treat her differently. Before, it seemed to her that the whole world had betrayed her. But in fact, it was she who was betraying herself. Yona asked if the maid really came to her because she wanted to work for her. Serving Yvonne was unbearable, so the maid was going to work faithfully for Yona if she took her on. The heroine just smiled and admitted that she would be happy to work with Cornelia. The maid brought with her a couple of things that Lady Yvonne had secretly kept. One glance was enough to understand that this was an invitation from Irene Kruger. She was a young favorite of the Kruger family, who had a habit of spending huge sums of money. Her balls, with their comfortable atmosphere and strong drinks, attracted a large number of aristocrats. All the young nobles interested in romantic relationships were also present, so Yvonne attended the receptions regularly. Usually, when Yona received invitations, she would decline them, but those days were in the past, so she was about to make her first public appearance. Soon, the girl went to the knight's dining room, where real chaos reigned. Many of the subordinates had already heard that Yona had been to the viewing. He stated that the entire knightly order was already talking about this, so everyone knew. The girl looked around and realized that everyone was looking at her, trying to understand what was happening. Yona got angry and said that after lunch, the guy would go with her so that she could personally check his combat training. The girl knew that the young man would not want to fight with her, so he would immediately run away and stop asking her questions. Yona didn't understand why everyone was so eager to poke their noses into other people's business. Contrary to what it might seem from the outside, there was no hint of feelings between her and Han. However, the girl hoped that they would be able to at least appear as a model couple on the outside. She was worried that she might have been too cold to the Duke at their first meeting. She wanted to prove to him that there were many advantages to being married to her, so she might have gone too far. Before Yona had time to breathe a sigh of relief, 2 more knights approached her and began asking about the date. They heard that the girl's companion was a real handsome man. Yona didn't want to take part in these questions, so she confirmed their guesses, after which she got up from the table. The knights were boring her with their gossip, so the girl decided to work to put her thoughts in order. However, when she came to Richard, he also began to ask her about their past date. The young man said that he came across an interesting article in the newspaper. The newspaper for the townspeople wrote that the Ice Knight who stole the hearts of half the young men was seen with the Duke. Richard thought it was no wonder that the Ice Knight lady had instantly captured the heart of her fiancé. Yona bowed her head and admitted that it seemed like Han himself didn't like her. Richard said he was very sorry, but it was said with obvious mockery. Yona understood perfectly well that the young man had forced her into this marriage only to mock her once again. With Richard's permission, the girl asked why he had chosen the Duke as her groom. The prince immediately became serious and considered this question strange, because his knight usually did not ask such a thing. Yona immediately apologized to the gentleman, because she didn't mean anything like that. Richard reminded that the girl was getting married only because it was his order, and she did not object. The girl herself understood that in her past life, she would have done exactly this. The prince reminded that this was a marriage of convenience, not love, so there was no need to fill your head with unnecessary reasoning. And if Yona asks about this nonsense again, he might become disappointed in her. After this, the meal was over, and the prince was about to leave. He knew that Fiona would come to him soon, so he asked her to detain him and tell him that he was not at his place. One of the maids admitted after the prince left that if Yona had said that she did not want to get married, Richard would not have been so angry. However, the girl knew that this was not so, because asking about the reason for this or that order was not such a grave sin as wandering in a dream of delusions. judging by the fact that he ordered her to distract Lady Fiona. The prince was currently in a silly mood. Fiona was the daughter of a marquis, and also the fiancée of His Highness Richard, and she simply could not stand Yona. The knight said that the prince was currently resting, and she could escort Fiona to the reception room, where she would wait for him to wake up. The bride remembered that the last time she had sat in this terrible room for about half a day. Yona apologized to her sincerely, realizing that she could do nothing more. Fiona demanded that the girl immediately inform the prince of her arrival, but Yona could not do this. The bride was furious that the girl refused to obey her order and asked for understanding. Instead, Fiona walked up to the knight and slapped her. Yona still continued to insist that the girl go to the reception area, even though she received a blow in the same place where her brother had hit her. However, instead of answering, the bride continued to hit the knight in the face again and again. The bride was furious that some simple knight contradicted her and boldly pointed out. Even the maids were shocked by this cruelty and did not understand why the mistress was behaving this way. After a while, when the bride's hands were tired from striking, she finally calmed down. Fiona was the prince's fiancée, but still lower in status than the earl's daughter. Such behavior was unacceptable. However, the girl understood that the knight would not tell her anything, because for her, as for everyone else, she was just the prince's watchdog. Yona herself understood that they were right, because she had been exactly like that her whole life. Fiona hoped that from now on, having received enough blows, the knight would obey her. However, what the girl didn't know was that a few days ago, Yona had decided to completely change her life. She promised herself that she would no longer remain on this chain and would stand up for herself. Fiona looked at her opponent with a smug smile, waiting for the moment when they would bow their heads before her. But instead, Yona ordered that a wet towel be brought to her, and that she go to the commander of the order and inform him that she was beginning the action according to the 4th point of the security protocol. Yona declared that Lady Fiona was obstructing the execution of official duties and would be immediately expelled from the Imperial Palace. The bride was shocked that someone was going to kick her out. Yona added that after this, the girl and her family will be notified of the duration of the ban on entry to the palace. However, Fiona was not going to put up with this and demanded that the commander of the knights be brought immediately so that she could talk to her personally. Yona added that if the bride so wishes, they will follow the official procedure. However, she noted that she was not sure that having new witnesses would benefit the girl's reputation. Fiona reminded him that she would soon be Richard's wife and was not going to let the girl get away with it. However, Yona knew that Fiona would not marry the prince because of her past life. The girl is not part of the royal family, but has committed numerous crimes using her status as a bride. She hasn't changed a bit over the years, and in the past, Richard ended up just leaving her. Yona was sure that this time, it would be the same as last time. Therefore, it was necessary to remind Fiona that it would be better to have such conversations after the wedding took place. Although the girl was already ready to walk down the aisle, she never even saw the face of her future husband. Yona said that if the girl didn't leave on her own, she would have to kick her in the ass to speed her up. After this, Fiona became furious and was about to attack the knight again. However, the guards arrived and stopped the girl, arresting her. They grabbed the lady by the arms and dragged her out of the corridor to throw her outside the palace grounds. Yona realized that in her past life, she had not even dared to think about such behavior. But now she had no intention of proving anything to anyone. Only one maid inquired about the knight's condition after this skirmish. She thought that His Majesty was trying his best to break off the engagement, but Yona was not sure about that. The girl admitted that she had been hit on the same cheek so many times that it began to hurt a lot. Yona was upset that she would have to wear a ton of makeup again to cover up all the bruises. However, now that she had mostly gotten herself in order, Yona could move on. She didn't want to stay and listen to the commander's lectures, so she asked to convey that she left due to severe mental trauma. The first thing the girl did was go to the stables and was happy that she would finally be able to go home early. There she was found by Eric, who was a promising knight. On the day of the girl's death, he was assigned to the 1st Division under her command. Together, they covered the emperor, while he was preparing to escape. Even then, the young man noticed that the girl had received too cruel a retribution for her devotion. He noticed that as soon as Yona was no longer needed, they simply got rid of her. However, even after these words of his, she decided to remain on the battlefield, where she met her miserable end. The girl was genuinely interested in whether Knight Eric had survived that very day. The young man approached Yona and noticed that she had been hit in the face again. He realized that it was Fiona's work, because Niels would hardly risk his teeth a second time. Eric noticed that the girl was setting a bad example of loyalty, becoming a punching bag for anyone who felt like it, because now other knights could suffer too. He assumed that the girl even liked it, since she gave the prince's inner circle carte blanche to treat her in this way. He knew that she had even agreed, on the prince's orders, to marry someone she had never seen. Eric was angry and noticed that Yona was not a knight at all, but just a devoted dog that only barked on command. The girl was disappointed, because she had just begun to prove to everyone that this was not so. However, now she was not going to tolerate such treatment and noticed that the guy was wrong. She firmly stated that she was not anyone's dog, and then got ready to leave. Yona added that because of his big mouth, she has to remind him every time that she is still his boss. The girl confirmed the rumors that she really did kick Fiona out of the Imperial Palace. She explained that attacking an Imperial Knight while on duty was a grave crime that carried punishment. Yona realized that in the past, she had taken Eric's insolence as a sign of hatred towards her, but in reality, it was his way of showing his agitation. Even then, on the battlefield, the guy asked her not to die because it would be the most senseless death. He had no intention of following her order to retreat, because he didn't want to abandon his commander to certain death. At the time, Yona believed that she had to carry out the Emperor's orders, but in the end, she betrayed not only herself, but also her subordinates. The girl understood that if she had not obeyed the order, many of her squad would have survived that day. So Yona sincerely thanked Eric for his concern and care for her. She would also be furious if her subordinate had a bruise on his face. The girl noted that she was going to soon leave the service in the knightly order, and the guy would no longer have to endure the antics of the crazy boss. Eric pretended that he wasn't worried, and also demanded that they not joke about his departure. However, Yona jumped on her horse and announced that she was going to resign from her position because she was going to get married very soon. Eric didn't understand why he should quit if the girl was so devoted to her master. However, the boss didn't answer him at all, but simply galloped away silently. At that moment, Yona clearly realized that she was not going to show up for this job anymore. A few days later, another ball took place, organized by Irene Kruger. The woman informed all her acquaintances that Lady Yona was to attend their meeting. At first, many did not believe it, but the moment came when the girl herself showed up at the event. She looked absolutely gorgeous in this burgundy outfit, which perfectly complemented the color of her hair. The hostess of the evening immediately approached the guest to greet her after such a long absence from this kind of party. She remembered that the last time they saw each other was at the prince's birthday banquet last year. But that time, the girl was there as a personal guard, and it seemed to Irene that Yona was not interested in music, dancing, or romance. In fact, the woman could not believe that Yona herself decided to attend her events. She was a young subject of the prince, who, having practically no contact with any of the nobility, was surrounded by a haze of mystery. Now, the girl was supposed to become the wife of the heir of a noble family, and now her person was interesting to everyone. If Yona had only wished, she could have become one of the most famous ladies with a snap of her fingers. The girl informed the hostess of the evening that she had come to this event alone. She admitted that she received the invitation quite late, so she simply did not have time to find a companion. She apologized to the owner for not having time to warn her about this. Irene noticed that in communication, Yona behaved like a true aristocrat with impeccable manners, and it was not surprising that many noble ladies spoke well of her. The hostess said that before marriage, it would be a good idea to at least try dancing with other men, so it was even good that the girl came alone. She suggested that Yona enjoy the evening, and while the knight was walking around the hall, she noticed a sad girl off to the side. She looked at her dance diary and realized that no one had yet asked her to dance. The girl was embarrassed when a stranger suddenly approached her and spoke first. Yona introduced herself to the girl and asked permission to join her in this secluded place. It was Julia, the Baron's eldest daughter, who lived far from the capital, but stayed with relatives for the time of her debut. The girl admitted that this is why they are seeing each other for the first time, because she doesn't know anyone at all yet. Yona stated that in that case, Sir Thomas should have accompanied Julia to the capital. She admitted that she knew the girl's brother and had seen the Duke several times. From her past life, Yona knew that Thomas was the Baron's eldest son, so he and Han grew up together and became loyal comrades. From his rather free manner of speech and behavior, it was difficult to understand that he was actually a knight. It was even more difficult to imagine that he was in the role of a subordinate. Julia immediately became upset and said that her brother was not at the event at the moment. However, Yona knew very well that such events were not suitable for Thomas. He was too freedom-loving for them. However, She called him a lousy older brother because he sent his sister to the ball alone. The guy clearly didn't know that at such events, it is advisable to have one of your older relatives with you so that they can put you and someone else in the room. If Julia didn't mind, Yona offered to introduce her to some of her friends. In such places, it was customary for those higher in social standing to initiate conversation, so without support, it was difficult to even get an invitation to dance. The brother became the Duke's assistant in order to help the family, but he did not pay attention to his sister's difficulties. The other girls called her an ivy flower because no one paid attention to Julia, so she just stood quietly near the wall, not dancing. That's what they called her for a long time before this moment, but my brother couldn't understand it. Julia admitted that Yona would do her a great honor and help her a lot if he did such a thing for her. The girl admitted that she would soon marry the Duke and they would become one family. She wanted to leave a good impression of herself, so she told Julia not to worry. Thomas's sister was impressed by how beautiful the lady was and how confident she carried herself in society. Yona took her hand firmly and led her into the thick of things to introduce her to other people. One of the young men recognized his commander and ran up to the girl to greet her. He always wondered why a girl who loved to drink so much avoided parties. The young man inquired about the lady next to the knight, and Yona said that she was the younger sister of Thomas, the assistant of the Duke of Khan. Julia introduced herself formally and was embarrassed that the nice young man paid attention to her for the first time. The girl was having a good time getting to know Yona's colleagues and other aristocrats, so she didn't even notice how quickly time flew by. She said that her brother was supposed to pick her up soon, so she invited her new friend to come out and say hello to him. Yona understood that she couldn't let the girl go alone at such a late hour, so she agreed. Together, they strolled leisurely through the garden and arrived at the appointed meeting place. Julia noticed her brother from afar and began shouting at him to come quickly. Thomas was annoyed that the girl was late and was at the event so late. When meeting the young man, Yona said that she had decided to go out more often and wanted to meet Julia since her wedding was coming up soon. Thomas immediately covered his sister with his back and belligerently asked what the knight had in mind. Yona tried to explain that the guy simply misunderstood everything, but Thomas was only interested in how she knew that Julia was his younger sister. It wasn't a secret, but everyone knew that Yona almost never attended such events. Therefore, Thomas assumed that the girl was deliberately looking for his sister. The guy decided that Yona had gone to the ball on purpose and met his sister in order to win the Duke's trust. Here, Julia herself hit her brother on the back and said that you can't judge people so harshly whom you don't really know. She added that Thomas was being rude to the one who helped her so much because he didn't care about her. But Lady Yona helped her. Julia didn't know anyone in the capital, and so she simply propped herself up against the wall, and several balls ended with her not even exchanging a word with anyone. Thomas didn't understand why his sister told him about this only now. Julia burst into tears and admitted that she had no friends, no one spent time with her, and she had no one to ask to accompany her because her brother constantly refused her. She reminded him that she was a hindrance and a burden to her own older brother. But Lady Yona didn't think so. The girl spent the whole evening wonderfully, only thanks to her help. Julia continued to cry and talk about how her stupid brother didn't understand anything. Thomas apologized to the girl because he thought that she would be fine anyway, and therefore did not notice her feelings. He promised that now he would always be there for her, wherever she went. Julia stepped on his foot with her heel anyway, and ordered him to immediately apologize to Yona, to whom the young man had been rude. Julia herself bowed and thanked the girl for this evening. After her younger sister left, the knight noted that there was no point in apologizing, since she already knew perfectly well that Thomas didn't have an ounce of tact. Moreover, the guy turned out to be right, because she really did have a personal motive. The girl admitted that she wanted to make a good impression on him. She was much more serious about marriage than Thomas could have imagined. Yona knew that the young man did not trust her, and she could understand that. However, she sincerely wanted them to have a good relationship with the Duke as a married couple. Therefore, it was important for Yona that her assistant's opinion of her also changed, because they would soon be seeing each other constantly. The girl hoped that Thomas would soon serve her as faithfully as he did his master. Thomas noticed that the Duke was a man with a kind heart, and many envied him, so he apologized to the girl. Yona promised to pretend that neither this apology nor this mistake had ever happened, so she asked me to pass on something from her. It was a list of all the noble families who had invited her to their ball, and where the girl was going to attend. She would like the Duke to visit her at these balls because they are engaged, and it would be a strange picture if she were always alone. Yona noticed that she was currently living in her parents' house, so she couldn't send a messenger secretly, because that would only confuse everything for them. Thomas was extremely surprised when he realized that the girl seriously intended to attend balls with her fiancé. Everyone believed that Duke Han accepted the marriage proposal under pressure from the imperial family. To dispel these rumors, it was necessary to pretend that they had a close relationship, even if it was just playing to the public. Besides, Yona needs to get used to high society. After all, this is exactly the way the girl plans to achieve her goal. When Thomas returned and came to the Duke, he immediately noticed a change in his assistant. The guy admitted that he was going to stay with his relatives, but then an urgent task came up, so he had to come. The young man handed over a note from Yona with a list of all the events she intended to attend and invited the Duke to join her. Khan admitted that he had a feeling that the girl was drawing him into some kind of scam. He remembered their official meeting and how he couldn't take his eyes off his stunning bride. The young man was tormented by how hard his heart beat just at the thought of her. He noted that one must keep one's ears open with the girl, because it was not for nothing that she was called the prince's hound. Thomas believed that the prince did not deserve such devotion, and Lady Yona was smart enough to realize this in time. The young man even stated that someone else was lacking in intelligence, which aroused the Duke's suspicion. Then Thomas admitted that he had recently been stupid and had groundlessly accused the girl of all sins. Khan demanded that the guy speak directly while he was still asking nicely. However, Thomas decided not to interfere with the gentleman's arguments with his personal convictions, leaving him to guess. Before leaving, the guy advised me to visit his younger sister, who was definitely not aware of all these political intrigues. From his words, the Duke understood that something had happened at the party. The young man even offered to walk the girl with him next time if she still hadn't managed to find good friends. Thomas realized that even if the gentleman knew that all young ladies went out either with an escort or with one of their family members, he would get into even more trouble from his sister. Only after his subordinate left did the Duke finally reveal the message, as he thought it had a hidden meaning that Thomas had not noticed. However, it was really just a list of names of noble families, so Khan was even a little upset. He realized that the girl always managed to amaze him with her actions. And at this time, Yona had just returned home, and the first thing she intended to do was talk to her own father. The Count was delighted with the wonderful and calm day and hoped that he would soon be able to go and rest. However, he became scared when Yona suddenly appeared on his doorstep. The man tried to close the door, but the girl was too strong and simply broke the handle. The girl assumed that the Count was avoiding her, but he tried to justify himself and change the subject. Yona hadn't seen her father for so long that she thought he had decided to run away from her. The knight, having settled in her father's office, reported that her brother had sent an assassin to kill her. The man thought this was nonsense and demanded at least one piece of proof that it was indeed Nils. Then Yona confessed that she had caught the killer and tortured him, after which he gave up the name of the employer. The Count immediately began to apologize to the girl for not being able to raise his children properly. The man was furious with his boys, because if he did not marry Yona off as soon as possible, he would ruin his relationship with the imperial family. Therefore, the Count promised that they would do anything to make the girl forget about it. Yona really suspected that the man didn't give a damn about her, but that was exactly what she needed. She admitted that she wanted her father to officially appoint Niels as the family's heir. She understood perfectly well the reason for his actions, because he himself could not become the head. He was not declared the heir, so he turned his anger on his sister, because she would soon become a duchess. The Count stated that this could not even be called a reason, and moreover, the girl had recently sought to head the family. However, Yona knew that the man would never give her this title, even if she asked for it. It always seemed to his brother that he was inferior to Yona in everything, but it was a matter of purity of blood. And after his rise, all the misunderstandings in their rivalry would disappear. The Count promised that he would sort it out completely, so the girl need not worry about it. Yona understood that Niels would not trust her words, so she wanted her father to tell him about it himself. Soon the whole family gathered around the table to have dinner together. Unexpectedly, the father announced that he was officially declaring Niels the heir to the family. The young man was very happy that the Count had finally recognized him as worthy. Yvonne immediately rushed to hug her brother and congratulate him on his victory. The guy had already managed to feel his superiority, but the Count added that the reason he had refrained from appointing an heir all this time was the guy himself. The son never thought about the consequences of his actions, so now he is obliged to be careful and circumspect. The young man promised that he would not disappoint his father with new problems. Yona congratulated her brother on receiving the title she had long sought. Now that his father had officially recognized Niels as his heir, all he had to do was get rid of his annoying half-sister. After the meal was over, when the count had left, Niels began to mock Yona. He reminded him that the girl was an illegitimate scum who was so eager for power, so she shouldn't pretend to be a faithful hound, because she was just a mongrel. In response to his insults, Yona only smiled and noted that these were very inappropriate words for a count. The girl could not believe that her father managed to give birth to an heir who barks at a pathetic dog, and even left him the title with difficulty. The girl thought that the guy didn't have enough brains to undergo a proper training for the heir. These words enraged Niels, so he grabbed the girl and lifted her off the table. Yvonne asked Niels to stop, because if his dad saw him, he would be very angry. These words convinced the young man, and he let Yona go, promising that he would return to this conversation. Now that all of her brother's attention was no longer focused on Yona, she could begin her preparations. Maria helped her mistress get ready and reminded her that today she was going to Count Robert's ball. While Niels was busy preparing for his accession to the title, Yona attended the capital's balls and dinner parties every day. One of them invited her to attend an equestrian competition this fall. Elsewhere, the girl found appreciation for her work as a knight and made good friends. I found common interests and was able to adjust to attending events. However, it was not without incident, because in his past life, at about the same time, the Duke went in search of his former fiancée, Vivian. The Count and Countess, her parents, were executed for collaborating with a foreign power, but she herself disappeared. The Duke's readiness for engagement was only a pretense. In reality, he hoped to find his former bride. However, his search was unsuccessful, so Yona knew that Han would not come, even though she sent him a note. She felt a little lonely, even though she had recently embroidered a scarf for her fiancé at an event. The hostess of the evening thought that Lev was a raccoon because Yona herself was not very skilled in embroidery. The girl thought that if she touched up the embroidery a little before the next meeting, it would be very nice. She hoped that the Duke would like her gift, but she didn't even know when they would see each other again. Yona was very surprised when she saw the Khan himself behind the door, who was already waiting for her. The girl admitted that she did not expect him to come straight to her home. In fact, the Duke knew that today Yona was going to Count Robert's ball. She herself said that it would be problematic if they saw each other where there were other people's eyes and ears. However, Yona believed that this did not mean that the guy could suddenly come to her house without warning. The young man admitted that he did not come alone. He brought gifts with him. He was followed into the room by a number of servants carrying gift boxes. Inside was a huge amount of jewelry and outfits that perfectly matched her appearance. The Duke admitted that he found out the bride's sizes when he visited the shop, where she usually orders her dresses, and asked them for measurements. Yona thought that there was no need to bother herself with gifts, since she had enough outfits. However, the young man understood perfectly well that all her outfits were outdated and had already seen better days. He admitted that if you look at the quantity and quality of Yona's dresses, you might think that she does not belong to a noble family at all. He added that her frugality is a good quality because there is no point in spending hard-earned money on something that is not interesting to a girl. However, this did not mean that Khan should bear the costs for such things. However, the Duke added that, unlike the girl, for him, these gifts were just a trifle. In that case, Yona smiled and admitted that she would accept them with gratitude. Unexpectedly, the Duke asked permission to ask the girl a rather unpleasant question. He asked why she was not treated very well in this house. The man noticed that family members often raised their voices and used force against the girl. He even heard that the recently appointed heir to the family envied her and even stooped to assault. Yona remained silent, and Han reminded her that she, who had never lied to her master, was now not being completely honest with her future husband. The knight admitted that she was simply thinking about how best to explain everything. She told the Duke that the bruises on her face were from Lady Fiona's blows. The Khan did not expect such an answer at all, because he did not think that the girl who was supposed to marry the prince would be involved in this. He demanded that Maria immediately bring the medicinal ointment. However, Yona knew about her maid's awkwardness and admitted that Maria was not the best assistant in this matter. However, the Duke grabbed the medicine and carefully applied it to the scratches on the girl's face. Yona experienced strange feelings, because in her past life, she and her fiancé even kissed, and now he only touched her face. Han admitted that he wouldn't bother with such trifles, but Yona looked like she wasn't going to do it herself. The girl was curious why Khan accepted her proposal, because before that, she had also had to beg him for marriage. In this life, nothing like this happened, but the Count invited the Duke to dinner. At first, they engaged in small talk and discussed the excellent cooking that the cook had prepared. The Duke even asked to convey his gratitude to the kitchen because everything was very tasty. That time, Yvonne drank too much wine and felt dizzy. She said that she needed to go out for a while and asked Yona to accompany her. Walking out into the corridor, the girl declared that her sister did not deserve such a chance. If she still has a grain of brain left in her, she should go to the Duke and tell him that she will not marry him because of their difference in status. She demanded that the Duke take the younger and more beautiful sister as his wife, but Yona was not going to resist the prince's order. Yvonne didn't believe it and thought that Yona was simply too greedy for the Duke's money. The girl threatened that she would then go to the Khan herself and report that Yona was in fact a dirty, illegitimate brat. She reminded that a man will not share a bed with someone who was born from an unknown source. Yona held on with all her might and asked Yvonne to calm down, because she herself did not choose what family she would be born into. Yvonne was not calmed down and could not believe that someone was making her terrible sister worthy of marrying the Duke. After this, the sister became completely angry and intended to return to the dining room and tell everyone everything. However, before she had time to go inside, the Duke himself opened the door and walked out into the corridor. The young man heard their quarrel and learned that Lady Yona was not actually an adopted child, but an illegitimate daughter. Yvonne admitted that she always wanted to tell the Khan about this, but her sister behaved so impudently that she simply could not. The Duke was angry and remarked that it was high time for the young lady to return back to the dining room. Yvonne was glad that she had caused trouble for her sister, and now she would discuss this news alone with her fiancé. The girl hoped that the Duke would not mince words and scold Yona. After they were alone, the young man asked her to explain the situation to him. Yona was shaking with fear and knew that she had no excuse, because this was the truth. She dared to deceive the Duke and insist on the wedding. This cannot be forgiven, because otherwise he can cancel the engagement, and then she will not fulfill Richard's order. The girl believed that she had to marry the Duke, otherwise His Majesty would decide that she was useless and leave her. Then Yona confessed that Han had heard the pure truth, and that she really was the Count's illegitimate child. The Duke realized that the girl was trying to deceive him, but she begged him not to break off their engagement. She promised to make sure that no one would know about her origin, because the family also did not intend to share this secret with anyone. She literally cried as she begged the young man to give her another chance, promising that she would not cause him any problems. The young man remained silent, and Yona no longer knew what else she should say to convince him. Suddenly, the Duke pressed her to his chest and asked her to stop crying. He promised that he would take the girl as his wife, so she needs to calm down and not worry about anything. Yona realized that the young man had agreed to marry her for only one simple reason. He simply felt sorry for her and could not ignore such an insignificant creature. She clung to this kindness and ended up depriving him of happiness. If Yona tells about this now and starts crying, the guy will also take pity and marry her. However, now the girl has stated that she is not at all patient in forgiving such treatment. Yona noticed that she had gotten a couple of bruises, but Niels had lost a few of his front teeth. Because of this, he now talks like a 3-year-old child. And Lady Fiona was thrown out of the palace for hitting a knight who was doing his duty, so she got what she deserved. The Duke laughed and admitted that he found it funny how the girl was proud of her justified revenge. Yona admitted that she would not call this revenge justified, because she had a lot of fun while doing all this. Suddenly, the Duke asked whether the girl had always acted the same way when she was treated in this way. However, Yona admitted that if she answered all sorts of questions every time, you would simply get exhausted. From her answer, the Duke concluded that such a relationship was nothing new to her. The girl understood this perfectly well, but she was not going to make a mountain out of a molehill. The Duke noted that the fact that such things happened too often did not mean that the girl had not been in pain all the time. He gently stroked her hand and added that such things could not help but cause pain. He knew perfectly well that Yona would not have lost consciousness from a couple of slaps. He even jokingly apologized to the girl for mistaking her for an ordinary lady. Yona remembered that the only one who did not treat her as either an illegitimate offspring or the Emperor's dog was the Duke. Even after returning to the past, the girl immediately began to beg him to marry her again. She believed that if she really wanted to help him, she would give him a chance to find true love. Yona didn't think she was in love with the Duke, but her thoughts went back to the past. She did not understand how all these thoughts and feelings that were mixed inside her could be called simple love. In the evening, Yona and the Duke went to Robert's mansion for an event. The crowd was delighted that the bride and groom arrived together, as rumors had suggested. Yona admitted that in one evening, she received more attention than in her entire life, and it was all thanks to the Duke and his gift. Khan admitted that they all suited her perfectly. Last time he thought the girl was beautiful, but he didn't even realize how much more beautiful she could become. The first to approach the young people were the hosts of the evening to greet them. It was Eric's parents, but Yona didn't understand why her subordinate looked so stunned. After greeting him, the Count admitted that he had known the Duke's father before the accident. He remembered that the man was very popular with the ladies, which was passed on to his son. The hosts of the evening would have been happy to continue this conversation, but they needed to greet the rest of the guests, so they left. Then Eric came forward and asked what Yona had forgotten at their ball. The first thing the girl did was introduce the young man to her companion. The Duke and Eric shook hands when they met. The subordinate noticed that Han looked quite powerful, which was surprising considering he came with Yona. However, the Duke, in turn, noticed that Lady Yona was a girl of incredible beauty. The heroine herself intervened and reminded that a subordinate should not dig a hole for himself and insult his boss in front of everyone. The young man was forced to step back when his parents called him to greet the rest of the guests. Yona hoped that no fool would fall for the knight's pretty face, because he couldn't control himself. The Duke brought 2 glasses of alcohol and hoped that Yona herself would not be taken in by his beauty. However, the girl recalled how her own subordinate had just communicated with her. The Duke noticed that the boy was very small, but his temperament was quite cruel, because he did not hold back even in a handshake. Yona added that the boy also has terrible eyesight and can hardly distinguish between people. The Duke was amazed that the girl actually decided to defend another man in a conversation with her. However, Yona admitted that she was only doing this because Eric was her subordinate, with whom they had been through fire and water. She apologized to the Khan if her words had offended him, and at the same time apologized for the behavior of her subordinate. The Duke didn't like the girl taking responsibility for other people, so he asked her to stop. Just at that moment, other guests called out to them and came up to welcome them to the event. Many of the nobles wanted to communicate with Lady Yona and the Duke, so they captured their attention. Some of them were eager to get to know each other better, so that they could then gain the trust and enjoy the favor of their future spouses. Neil's friends were also wondering whether they should go up and greet the prince's confidant, who would soon become a duchess. The guys wanted to come up and lighten the mood, to show that they were not like Neil's. Then the girl would treat them differently. Yona saw this company from afar and warned that their plan had started to work. Now that Niels's friends were getting closer to the future spouses, it was necessary to act quickly. The young men approached and introduced themselves one by one, adding which houses they belonged to. However, the girl did not even remember their names, because they all pretended to be important people, but in the end, they were just children of rich parents or second sons without any influence. The girl had no intention of making friends with them, but the card layout turned out to be extremely successful. One of the guys noticed that the girl had become even more beautiful lately. Yona thanked the young men for their compliments and admitted that it was all thanks to the gifts from her future husband. She understood that the guys were disappointed that he didn't attend the ball because he had been very busy with his studies lately. The boys had already heard that he had been appointed as the heir to the family, so they couldn't get together until the official ceremony took place. Yona admitted that she was ready to take part in the meeting instead of her brother, if they did not object, because she also did not mind playing games of chance. The guys were delighted and regretted that they had not invited the girl to join their company earlier. They then asked if his lordship would like to join them at table. Khan smiled and admitted that he would be more than happy if he could come to him with his future wife. The group of young people were delighted and promised that they would wait for the couple at their meeting. After they left, Yona admitted that thanks to the Duke's help, everything went as well as possible. Suddenly, the knight noticed that Eric was making a hand gesture to her, which meant that they needed to go out onto the balcony and talk. Yona reminded him that it was time for the Duke to go, since he had promised to dance with the Count's daughter. The young man noticed that he had been so busy chasing other men away from his bride that he had almost forgotten his promise. Yona caught the joke in his voice and promised that she would wait for the Khan's return. The young man was amused by the fact that she constantly behaved like a knight and could not relax. The Duke noticed that Yona might not be waiting for him at attention, but simply having fun. But before leaving, he asked the girl not to accept an invitation to dance from his subordinate Eric. If the ill-mannered man loses control of his power again, the girl will be in danger. Although Yona found this a little strange, she promised to fulfill his request. The girl was enjoying herself at the event and desserts, When Eric grabbed her hand and asked why she didn't go out to the balcony, Yona reminded that she shouldn't immediately run to carry out her subordinate's orders. The guy himself realized that he had gone too far, so he politely asked the girl to talk. The heroine dodged this as best she could, but Eric couldn't stand it and said that he had a very important conversation, so he would even invite her to dance. Remembering her promise, the knight refused, but agreed to go out onto the balcony instead. Only there did Eric notice that the girl had completely lost her mind if she had decided to pull out her post because of some marriage. Yona didn't understand why the boy was so angry, so she asked him to calm down. Suddenly, the young man looked her straight in the eyes and asked her not to get married. Yona just took a deep breath and admitted that she wasn't even going to answer that. Eric believed that this whole wedding was only about the prince, to which Yona could not answer him. She didn't want to lie to Eric, but she didn't want to inform the prince about her plans either. The guy didn't understand how much lower the girl wanted to fall, although he understood how devoted a knight could be to his master. However, if a girl gives up the title of knight because of one order, then in the end there will be nothing left. He thought that Yona at least truly loved the art of fighting, even though she often wasted her talent. Only now did the girl realize that Eric had decided that she was leaving her service on the prince's orders. This was not the case at all, because she decided to resign and marry the duke not by order of the prince or under pressure from her family, but of her own free will. So Yona explained directly that the young man had misunderstood everything. She explained that the prince had not given her an order to leave the knightly order, and in fact was still confident that she would continue to serve him as before. That's why Yona wanted Eric to stop making up such nonsense. Besides, the girl hasn't made this decision yet, because it's hard to try such a job all your life. The pay is pretty good, but you can only withstand that kind of pressure when you're young, so she decided to change direction. She explained that she had been running in the same circle for so long that she realized she wanted to take a path she had never thought about before. Commander Saskia noted that she understood the girl perfectly, because everyone knew how she suffered in the family. Since Yona now wants to start a real family, her colleagues and friends should support her as much as possible. However, Eric believed that in such a marriage, one could not count on having a real family, and that quitting one's job for this was complete nonsense. Saskia noted that resignation was inevitable, since it was impossible to be a devoted servant to the prince and a worthy wife for the duke. Eric suggested that the prince had secretly ordered the girl to resign. The commander admitted that she felt sorry for Yona, but she was not going to interfere with her marriage. Jealousy is at the root of both reasons why someone might be against the marriage in the first place. So Saskia's first thought was that the young man had his eye on the duke, which he denied. This meant that the guy simply didn't want Yona to get married at all. It was at that moment that the guy realized that he was jealous, but he still denied his feelings and did not understand the way Yona spoke. He admitted that all this was unclear to him and asked for a more detailed explanation. It was this conversation that the girl tried to escape from, but she still failed. She explained that this was a top secret that had to be kept even from the emperor. This time, Yona was going to protect the duke and wanted to make sure he was happy. Therefore, the girl was going to do everything so that she herself would be happy in marriage with him. Besides, it was not for nothing that Yona had escaped death by being reborn, so she wanted to be greedy at least a little. She admitted that she wanted a little romance, so she hoped that Eric understood her. However, this explanation only made things worse and made the young man even more angry. He was disappointed because he was sincerely worried about the girl, and now she was leading him by the nose. But the guy didn't care. He just wished the commander happiness in his future marriage and told him to do as he knew. Yona sighed tiredly because she didn't understand why the guy suddenly got so angry. The girl herself was worried because she didn't know for sure whether this marriage would be happy for her and the duke. Khan saw an angry Eric running out of the balcony, so he assumed that his bride was there. Yona admitted that they were just discussing some things, but nothing serious. The young man admitted that he watches the girl all the time because he cannot understand what she is thinking. As a child, the duke heard that if you marry without love, the marriage will not be happy. Yona's old teacher also said that marriage will not be happy without love. Then he trained her to the point of exhaustion and tried to force the girl to develop her skills to the maximum. He then stated that when two irresponsible people meet and do irresponsible things, the result is people like her. So Yona wondered if the duke believed these words. He didn't believe in them, but he would really like to know if that person still thought so. It was not easy to ask directly, and he himself was no longer at the age to ask such questions. Yona wasn't entirely sure whether she believed that phrase either, but she was sure of something else. She understood perfectly well that the Duke had overheard her conversation with Eric, and that was why he began to talk about love. The Khan laughed and noted that the girl was not particularly quick-witted, if she only realized this now. He reached the balcony just as Eric was demanding that the girl give him an honest answer. Khan wanted to wait, because now the guy was asking a question, the answer to which he himself would like to hear. However, the Duke did not expect at all that Yona agreed to marry him and leave her post for the sake of a happy married life. And the young man was even more embarrassed when he heard that she would like a little romance. The Duke coughed, choking on his champagne, just as Eric emerged from the balcony and accused him of forcing them both into marriage. The Khan realized that he had accidentally created this misunderstanding, but he saw no point in apologizing for it, since the knight had the audacity to try to hit on his future wife. At some point, the young man thought that in fact there had been no misunderstanding. Yona didn't know how much the Duke had heard, but she wanted Eric to stop asking questions, so she said the first thing that came to mind. But she had no ulterior motives. The Duke asked the girl if she would mind if he had an affair outside the marriage, since she did not consider it her goal to make him happy. Yona noted that this issue concerns marital fidelity, and even if the marriage is not concluded for love, one must at least respect each other a little. Khan laughed, because it was just a joke, but now he understood better what was on the girl's mind. The young man realized that he saw potential in the girl, so he wanted to take her into his family. But her family, instead of cherishing her, only brazenly used her as a tool. Prince Richard himself pretended that she was important to him, but at the same time, he drew her into his dirty deeds. From the moment the talk of marriage began, Yona showed nothing but sincere care and kindness to her fiancé. And only now did the young man realize why she was so eager to do everything to make this marriage happy. Khan realized that she could not marry for love, and therefore tried to love the one with whom she was forced to go down the aisle. Therefore, the young man stated that he also believes that fidelity between spouses is an extremely serious issue. So he extended his little finger to the girl and suggested that they promise each other something. He wanted them to be faithful to each other if they did get married. Yona was scared, because she didn't want to oblige the young man like that. However, Khan reminded that the promise is made by both sides, so he will not be the only one who is obliged to keep it. Even if a past love of their life appears on the horizon, the promise must not be broken, and there should not even be a moment when one of them allows the thought of divorce to arise. The Duke wanted them to work together to ensure that this marriage would not bring any misfortune. This option suited Yona, and she happily made a promise to the Duke, hoping that they would be able to keep it. At this time, Prince Richard went to the far part of the castle to greet an important person. It was his mother, who had lived in seclusion for a long time, hiding her face behind a veil. Richard was busy with things, so he lost track of time and was late for the meeting, even though he was invited. Mother noted that this was a great excuse, and the guy always used it when he found himself in a difficult situation. Richard knew that he would never see her face, which was hidden behind this veil, even though 15 years had passed. Then a terrible fire broke out in the palace, and the mother received serious burns. From that very day on, Mother no longer appeared in public and did not show herself to anyone. In an attempt to hide the terrible scars left by the fire, she threw a veil over her face and locked herself here, deep in the palace. Richard knew that the best strategy for talking to his mother was to minimize the factor that might lead us to criticize him, so that it would end as quickly as possible. The guy noticed that he had just finished all the work and immediately hurried to her. The first thing Mother started talking about was the girl who was soon to get married. After her words, the young man immediately understood why his mother had called him to her at such a late hour. The woman knew that this was the right decision, because once the girl went far away, it would be very difficult to return to the capital. She always told her son this, because she believed that keeping the girl close to him was the biggest of his misdeeds. Richard always told his mother that there was nothing between them. Although rumors were inevitable, all he could do was watch as his mother dealt with everyone who was near him. However, when Yona becomes a duchess, even her mother will have a hard time reaching her. However, the woman believed that Khan was too good for the girl and did not suit her status. Although one cannot marry a lady from a noble family to just anyone, she noticed that they do not criticize her son, but only express their opinion. The woman asked if the Duke had agreed to this marriage proposal. However, Richard stated that the guy would have no choice, because this marriage had already become an indicator of the imperial family's trust in his lineage, and he would not miss such a chance. Several years ago, the last representative of the family, Vivian, the Duke's former fiancée, lost both her family and her position in society due to false accusations. Richard already knew where she was and thought that one day the girl might be useful to him, so he kept her under control. The prince made this decision almost instinctively, but his intuition did not fail him. If the Duke breaks off the engagement, he will use his pawn and threaten him. Richard hoped that this was the end of his conversation with his mother and that he could leave. The woman didn't understand why the guy wouldn't take even a minute to just have tea with his mother. She noticed that he didn't even touch the dessert that she had prepared, especially for him, even though he loved it as a child. Richard was surprised that the woman remembered how much he loved fig cookies. Mother began to remember something from the past, but immediately after that, she remembered the fire and she began to have a panic attack. She screamed and tried to cover her face with a veil, demanding to be left alone. Richard tried to stop the woman and asked her not to become hysterical, but it was too late. He didn't understand why his mother was so scared, because that girl from her past was no longer alive. He recalled that his mother personally made sure that this was done. Richard's words finished off the woman, and she let out such a terrible scream that even the maids through the door became worried. They ran into the room and saw that all the cups and plates were broken, and Mother demanded that she be left alone immediately. Richard got what he wanted and drove her crazy, although he was not happy with the fact that the blood of this crazy woman flowed in his veins. The first thing the young man asked was whether Yona had returned to work. He learned that the girl was currently recovering from mental trauma and was busy with the order's reports, so he ordered her to be called to him. The head maid reported that the girl had a day off today and was not in the palace, so she suggested sending a messenger to the Duke's house. Richard was worried that Yona was going wherever she wanted, but he couldn't lock her up either. All he could do was watch, because for his plan to be carried out, his father, mother, and Niels had to die. Meanwhile, in the boutique, the owner was praising a dress that was elegantly decorated with a draped skirt made of the finest silk. She explained that with this fabric, the skirt moves with every step, which gives the girl a very graceful look. Yona hasn't bought a dress for so long that she has completely lost track of them. The store owner was delighted and was going to advertise several more models, even though Yona only arrived with her dress up. She said the person who placed the order insisted that there should be at least 20 dresses. Every girl knew that Penelope's boutique was an incredibly popular place. Every noble person dreamed of a dress from this boutique, because they are all made from the best materials. Yvonne was disappointed when her mistress told her that the Duke was extremely pleased with the last outfit, so he asked her to make more dresses for Yona. Yvonne decided that her wish had finally come true, so the knight enjoyed watching her. Yona stepped away for a moment, as she was upset that her wardrobe really was so pathetic. Maria had told her about this for a long time, but the girl only now realized how bad everything was. The maid gave her mistress a letter from John, Niels's friend, who had sent an invitation. Yona admitted that he did it because she asked him to, because she needed something from him. It looked like a normal visit, although he was going with a girl to a gambling house, where payment was accepted not only in money. Yona ordered the maid to keep the invitation with her, and she would answer at home. They had to go back, and Maria noticed that if they stayed too long, the girl would be misunderstood. Yona didn't want to go back, but she had no choice, so she had to finish with the dresses as quickly as possible. As soon as the girls entered the boutique, they immediately heard Yvonne arguing with the owner. The owner refused to sew the dress and take Yvonne's order, even though she was Yona's sister. The girl ran up to her sister and ordered her to make the hostess take her order. However, Yona just smiled and refused to do so. Then Yvonne threatened to go to the Duke and tell him about her sister's secret, after which this marriage would immediately fall apart. The knight was even curious about what kind of magic spell it was that would destroy everything. Yvonne knew that as soon as the Duke heard, he would immediately break off the engagement and choose a younger bride from the family, for example, herself. However, Yona approached her sister and asked if she even understood why they wanted to marry her off to the Duke. She explained that having as a wife someone who was considered the prince's concubine was a huge disgrace for the Duke's family, and Yvonne, who had been bathing in luxury since infancy, was not suitable for these purposes. The girl refused to believe it and thought that Yona was simply lying to her face. She even tried to hit her again, but this time the knight stopped her sister and noted that she could go to the Duke and tell him whatever she wanted at any time. Yvonne herself noticed that Yona was holding on to this opportunity until the very end, which meant that she was also going to take revenge for her. Only after this did the girl calm down and ask him to let go of her hand. Yona did so, pushing her sister away as she did so, causing her to fall to the floor. Jonah and Maria left, leaving Yvonne lying on the floor after this humiliation. 4 days later, the Duke and Jonah arrived at Jonah's family home, and a meeting was to take place. This time, the girl was dressed luxuriously and thanked the young man for this gift. The Khan kissed her hand in greeting and said that there was nothing special about it. The first to accompany them at this meeting was John, who had been looking forward to this day. The young man suggested that the boys play cards, but Yona insisted on trying the dice game. At this point, Friedrich rose from the table and suggested that the young people organize a game of dice. No one thought that the ladies would enjoy such entertainment, but Yona believed that there was nothing better than good conversation at the gaming table. Friedrich suggested that the girl go first, and she knew that each player had 5 dice, and the goal was to guess how many specific numbers would be thrown by all players. They had agreed in advance that the order of play would start with Jonah, then John, Friedrich, and finish with the Duke. First of all, they all turned over their dice and placed their bets. However, the Duke made such an absurd bet that the others thought he simply did not fully understand the rules. Then the young men simultaneously raised their glasses and looked at the dice to see who had won. It turned out that Yona won, believing that the Duke had lost on purpose. It looked as if the young man was really playing for the first time, because he didn't even know how many coins he had to give for one move. However, he turned everything to his advantage, noting that it gives a man real pleasure when his wife accepts all his gifts. Yona was confused by his words, but still insisted that they had to play by the rules, so she suggested changing places. The young people played quite a few rounds, and Friedrich ended up earning the most coins. The boys had been playing for quite a long time and were a little tired, so John suggested stopping the game and resting. Friedrich lit a cigar and offered one to the Duke. The young man did not smoke, but Yona herself reached for a cigar and happily joined in this event. She noticed that she was very similar to her brother because she had the same unlucky hand as Niels, so she lost everything. Friedrich agreed and noted that everyone has ups and downs. The man admitted that he had lost to Niels quite a lot and was able to win against Jonah only because he had accumulated a sufficient number of failures. The girl seized on these words and asked what had happened to their plot of land, which Niels had secretly written off from his father to pay off his gambling debt. John and Friedrich were frightened by her words because they didn't even know that anyone knew about it. Yona noted that even if the guy had won and lost, at least something would have remained of the plot. However, the entire plot was now in Friedrich's hands, so Yona suggested that everything be returned to its place before Niels officially became the heir. Friedrich tried to convince the girl that Niels had done nothing of the sort, but there was a misunderstanding. She did not believe that the transfer of part of their land into other hands would go unnoticed, because not long ago her brother offered his friends land from another region. John tried to insist that Niels had given away a completely useless piece of land. The mines there have long been abandoned. There are no people there. There is no one to collect taxes from, and they only accepted the land as collateral because the guy lost everything he had. The girl understood this perfectly well, but nothing changed the fact that he had arbitrarily disposed of the family's property without informing the Count. Yona explained that she was not mentioning all this in order to stir up conflict, but was simply suggesting that they sort out the problem before the head of the family found out about what had happened. The girl knew that the mines in this region no longer produced silver. Once upon a time, they belonged to the Imperial family, and the silver production was so great that it became an excellent support for financing the throne. However, everything changed when low-grade ore suddenly appeared there. Then, a series of accidents followed, and the mine became too difficult to manage. Knowing this, the Imperial family handed over the silver mines to the Yona family, but the deaths of the miners and the extraction of some domestic ore continued, so the mines were eventually closed. Both the Imperial family and the county stopped paying attention to the region, which led to the price of the land falling to an all-time low. Since the plot is considered useless, no one will do anything, even if Niels loses it in a card game, but the girl had a plan. She apologized for upsetting everyone with this tiresome conversation. However, she reminded that there is no need to worry because there are no unsolvable problems. John breathed a sigh of relief and thanked the girl for her concern. The young people decided to take a walk to get more drinks. Yona noticed that the young people were shuddering, so she suggested following them and finding out more information. She asked the Duke to pretend that he was doing all this out of good intentions, because the deal had to look like they wanted to make a good impression on the family. The current owner of the land will not want to spoil relations with the Count, and at the same time, he is unlikely to give away the land for free. If, in order to resolve this problem, the Duke suddenly offers to buy the land. In such a situation, he will look like a savior, and the deal will be completed in the blink of an eye. Yona explained that the costs of mining were quite high and unprofitable, but the silver vein was still not exhausted. If the plan succeeds, the girl would like to resume silver mining in this area. The Duke realized that the mine was abandoned for a reason, so he assumed that the girl already had a solution to the problem with the vein. Yona admitted that she had recently come across an article about a new method of mining minerals, but she herself did not understand it very well yet. She noted that if the Duke was interested in the method, she would introduce him to the right specialist. The girl wanted to light a cigar, and Khan politely pushed an ashtray towards her. Yona explained that she smokes quite rarely, and in situations like this, it is necessary to create a sense of community and common interests. She explained that she learned some rules of conduct very early on through her work. At that moment, the Khan thought that the prince smoked a pipe all the time, and it was he who taught the girl. The young man was interested in trying to smoke himself, even though Yona tried to dissuade him. The Duke took a drag and immediately began to cough from how much his throat was so sore. The girl explained that smoking is a very bad habit, so you shouldn't get used to it. She once saw a rat chew a cigar and die immediately, so there was nothing useful in them. The Duke noticed that she was ruining her own health, but forbade him, and for some reason always cared about him much more than about herself. He admitted that he was joking, but still suggested that the girl give up this bad habit. Yona promised that she would quit immediately if Han wanted her to, but in exchange, he would never try smoking again. The young man was embarrassed by her closeness, but noticed that she herself did not like this smoking. Han knew that he had showered Yona with so many gifts that rumors were bound to spread. He remembered the last conversation he had with Richard before their engagement. The Duke hoped that by now the rumors had already reached the prince's ears. He wondered what it was like for the prince now, watching someone take away what belonged to him. The Duke knew that if he were in his place, he would never let the woman he had feelings for marry another man. As Yona expected, the land purchase process went quite quickly and smoothly. Friedrich and John explained everything to the current owner, who happily sold the useless plot. Moreover, both families were very reluctant to make public the fact that the mine land had been gambled away by one heir to another. When handing over the documents, the girl asked when exactly the Duke had handed over this letter. The Khan came to visit yesterday, and it turned out that he knew the knight's younger brother, so he asked to pass on a letter to the commander. Thanks to the external similarity, Yona immediately understood which guy was being talked about. The girl immediately told this very knight's brother to stop hanging out with bad company, otherwise it wouldn't bring him any good. After this, the girl went to the prince, who had already heard that recently she had become incredibly close to her fiancé. Yona explained that she was only obediently carrying out the will of her master. The prince chuckled at the fact that Khan himself was going out of his way, and even decided to buy clothes for his bride. Richard wanted to light a cigar for the girl as usual, but she refused, because she felt awkward when she smelled of tobacco during the service. The prince stopped and realized that she hadn't cared about this at all before. He wondered why so many changes had occurred in the girl recently. The young man lit a cigarette and said that Yona should stop communicating with the Duke. Yona was surprised, but reminded him that the Duke had not yet given his official consent to the marriage. The prince promised that the girl should not worry about this, because he would be able to convince the Duke without her help. Yona agreed and said that she had been absent from the order for the last few days because she had extended her sick leave for a short time, but that she would be back on duty in full in 2 days. The prince noticed that the bruise from Fiona's slap had almost healed, although the girl was still covering it with makeup. But no one but him would notice it. The girl promised that she would immediately return to her duties if the prince so wished. Suddenly, the young man put his cigar aside and became very serious. He got the impression that Yona was upset with him for something. The girl realized that he was once again testing the waters, as if asking what else she was willing to sacrifice for him. Once she was no longer useful, she would simply be thrown out, so Yona didn't know what kind of answer the prince would give her this time. She admitted that she would never do such a thing, because she was Richard's loyal knight. The prince understood perfectly well that Yona's devotion was not based on affection alone, but the girl would not devote herself entirely to him forever. So he wanted to be the one to give her what she wanted most in the world. The young man admitted that the girl was too generous with her offenders. She may be just a simple knight, but she should keep in mind that they have been together since childhood, like a real family. So this time, Fiona crossed the line. Richard reminded that only Yona was allowed to enter his chambers without a pass, and the girl must understand who was dearest to him most. The girl removed her hand and asked him not to say these words, because they could hurt Fiona, who is the prince's future wife. The young man wanted to hear the girl's wishes and promised to call the bride here and make her publicly apologize if the knight wanted it. He gently stroked the girl's cheek and promised that he could demand substantial compensation from Fiona's family, or let high society know about her unforgivable behavior. In the end, the young man even promised that he could break off this engagement if only Yona asked him to do so. Suddenly, the girl said that, in that case, she would have to extend her vacation. If Yona herself were to go out into society, Lady Fiona would have no chance to take revenge on her, for she would fear condemnation. The knight also added that she needs to improve her work-life balance. The prince got tired of this game and agreed, but decided to set one condition. He demanded that Yona be his companion at least one official event during his vacation. The girl shuddered in surprise, which attracted the prince's attention. He reminded her that she had never questioned his orders, and then allowed her to leave. After the conversation ended, Yona was disappointed and realized that she shouldn't have used that excuse. Judging by the fact that in his past life, the Duke had been suspicious of the relationship between Yona and the prince, it was best to tell him about the condition that was set for her as soon as possible. The girl did not think that the Duke would become jealous of her, but still something in the prince's words worried her. She didn't understand where Richard got such confidence that Khan would definitely agree to the marriage. Given the situation, the only reason could be that the prince knows where Vivienne, the Duke's ex-fiancée, is. Yona realized that she had to find her at all costs before she fell into Richard's hands. This could change the Duke's attitude towards her, but the girl could not allow the one who was so dear to his heart to suffer. Soon the girl went to a meeting of the embroidery club, which she began to attend regularly. This time, she brought with her the embroidery she had started at the last meeting and hoped to finish it. The girls noticed that this was a great mood, so they promised that they would provide Yona with any help they could. One girl, Elsa, was late and apologized for not making it in time for the beginning. She wanted to sit next to Lady Yona because they had not seen each other for a long time. The knight explained that she went straight in her work uniform because she didn't want to stay late after work. Elsa continued to chat happily, and Yona's attention was focused on her maid, who was busy with the table. One of the girls asked Elsa to stop, because if she continued to entertain Yona, she would never finish her embroidery. The next second, Elsa screamed loudly, because Yona pierced her finger, and blood poured out of it. The girl took the blame for what happened on herself and her chatter, so she ordered her maid to immediately treat Yona's wound. The knight and Marie went into another room, where the maid carefully treated the wound and bandaged the lady's finger. The girls were curious how long the maid had been working for Lady Elsa. Marie explained that she moved a lot, so she can't tell you about all the places she worked before, but she has been working for Elsa for about 5 years. The girl was embarrassed by the questions and asked if Yona was really offering her another job. The knight confirmed that they really believed that the girl would be much better suited to another kind of occupation. She believed that a girl named Vivienne was eager to get home. Marie was so surprised that she dropped the medicine box on the floor. The girl immediately rushed to pick them up and collect them, and Yona watched her. She admitted that she did not wish the girl any harm, so she asked her to stop worrying. Marie knew that Yona was the prince's dog, so she was not going to believe her words and defended herself with scissors. In addition, Yona had recently become the bride of her ex-fiancé, so now the girl was afraid that her competitor wanted to get rid of her. Yona boldly grabbed the scissors and told them that the Duke had been looking everywhere for his former bride. Vivienne tried to pretend that she didn't know this man and that she had no desire whatsoever to meet him. Yona didn't understand why the girl didn't want this, because Han would do everything just to help her. She didn't want to see him because she was afraid that she would drag him into her squabbles again. The girl did not want to see anyone anymore and just wanted to remain an ordinary servant for the rest of her life. Yona knew perfectly well that Vivienne didn't want to be a burden to the Duke, but she wouldn't solve anything by simply running away from her problems. Yona added that the Imperial family already knew of her whereabouts, so she could be deprived of her life once she became useless. She handed the scissors back and added that Vivienne was like a hostage to them. If the girl wants revenge, she needs to meet Yona at the same time tomorrow. Otherwise, it's better to leave the capital and not inform anyone. Before making a decision, the girl wanted Yona to explain why she was doing all this. The knight admitted that she helps Vivienne because she is very dear to her future husband. However, she added that she is not ready to tolerate affairs, so if she is betrayed, she does not intend to forgive anyone. The ex promised that this would never happen, which reassured the girl. Soon the mistress and the maid returned back to the hall to the noble ladies. Yona explained her long absence by saying that she simply asked Marie to help her with the wounds she received during training. She thanked the girl for helping us get rid of all the scars. Elsa was pleased that her maid had been so helpful, so she praised the girl, embarrassing her. In fact, Yona blamed herself for being so careless that she almost missed Vivian. She was glad that unlimited access to the prince's office had its advantages. It was there, among the papers on his desk, that she was able to find information about Vivian. This put her one step ahead, and all she had to do was wait for Richard to fall into her trap. Sometime later, the anniversary of the death of the main character's stepmother arrived. The whole family gathered for breakfast, and a viscous silence filled the dining room. As Yona had expected, the Count left the mansion, citing important business. She didn't know whether he had left for work or was visiting his next lover, but now she could begin to implement the plan. In the main room, they placed a portrait of the mother and surrounded it with flowers, so that one could pay respects to the deceased at any time. It was in this room that Yvonne tried to kick out her father's mistress, who had come to their house. Fleur repeated once again that she would only talk to the Count and would not leave until she saw him. The girl was looking forward to this day, because if everything went as planned, she would be paid a whole lot of money. Niels reminded them that today was a very important day for them, so he demanded that the girl leave. Otherwise, they would have no choice but to kick her out by force. However, Fleur had no intention of leaving, which enraged the Count's children even more. Hearing the scandal, Yona came downstairs and demanded to know what was going on. Fleur was delighted that the girl had arrived just in time, so she told her that she was waiting for the Count. The mistress added that she may not be rich, but she has a very deep relationship with Yvonne and Niels's father. She even added that she was, in a way, a mother to them, which completely infuriated Yvonne. The girl couldn't hold back and hit her father's mistress, who dared to talk nonsense in their house on such a day. Yona intervened and covered her lover with herself so that no one could harm her anymore. Yvonne was furious that Yona stopped her and didn't let her finish what she started. The knight asked the girl to calm down and understand the Count's position, while she promised to send the woman away. However, Yvonne was not going to tolerate the insult of a man who dragged another woman into their house on the anniversary of her mother's death. The girl was about to pounce on her half-sister, but Niels stopped her, ordering her to be locked in the room and not let out for at least half an hour until she calmed down. He asked his sister not to go so far because of this cheap thing, and promised that he would sort it out himself. Yona turned to his mistress and informed her that by returning here without warning, she had put the Count in an extremely awkward position. She added that today is the anniversary of the Countess's death, so the Count will not receive guests on such a day. The knight asked her mistress to leave if she still had any self-respect. Fleur apologized for the incident and agreed to leave, asking him to convey her greetings to the Count. Niels was dissatisfied and ordered his sister to get out of the house too, because he did not want to see her face for another minute. But the girl smiled resolutely and admitted that she would have let these blockheads finish the job if she had known how it would all end. The guy was angry and reminded her that this did not atone for what happened to their mother. However, the girl did not feel guilty at all and reminded them that it was their dad who had fathered a child on the side. The fact is that the girl has no conscience, and she is simply afraid to say this to her father's face. He himself has accumulated a lot of unspoken things, but the boy is also silent in front of his father and always runs away from both him and Yona. Niels was furious that some damn girl dared to compare him to herself. Even though the girl raised her hand against her own father, she at least had the courage to do it. Yona noted that Niels was a pathetic coward and a parody of a man, and if he wanted to honor his mother, the first thing he would do would be to stop calling such a terrible man his father. After that, the girl smiled and asked if the guy wanted to know what his mother's last words were before she died. Niels grabbed the girl by the uniform and shook her, because the mention of his mother hurt him. However, this did not stop Yona, and she admitted that just before her death, her stepmother said that life for the sake of the Count was much worse than death itself. Niels was amazed at how different it was from what he thought. The Countess was the perfect embodiment of an elegant lady from high society. She valued the opinions of others highly, so she always behaved with respect and dignity, and all this made her live as if in a cage. She did not love her husband, but when they were forced into marriage, she was unswervingly devoted to him, and she remained like that even when her husband brought home an illegitimate child, conceived by an unknown person, and made him a member of the family. On the day of their mother's death, her children were unhappy that no one was allowed to see her. However, the doctor reported that Madame had strictly ordered that only Yona be allowed to see her, and not her relatives. Niels and Yvonne tried to persuade the doctor, but even the Count told them to shut up and follow the will of their mother. Yona didn't understand why her stepmother wanted to see her before she died. She was the only one in this house who never tormented the girl, but she behaved as if she were invisible and empty space. Yona thought it was futile to hope, but with all her heart, she wanted to hear something, words that her stepmother had never told anyone. As a result, the woman, who was one step away from death, blamed the girl for everything that happened. The knight initially assumed that all her hopes were in vain, and that her mother had not called her for this reason. Yona went to the woman, and she immediately asked her to come as close as possible. After that, she grabbed her with her bloody hand, pressed her to herself, and kissed her hard on the forehead. The doctor told the stepmother that her disease was contagious, so she wanted Yona to die after her. However, she believed that the girl would be cast down into the depths of hell, and that her mother would thereby put an end to their unhappy fates. Only now did Yona understand why she didn't want to let anyone in except her, because she planned to infect her stepdaughter with her disease and kill her. Her symptoms were very similar to the epidemic raging in the capital, so at first the doctor made an incorrect diagnosis, but then realized his mistake. But the stepmother was not told about it. If only Yona had not appeared in this family, the Countess would have lived her entire life as a model of nobility. The girl sincerely believed that her very existence had destroyed her entire life. Therefore, she hoped that her stepmother would go to heaven, and she herself would end up in hell. But the woman did not hear this, because by that moment, her heart had stopped beating. Yona just gently ran her hand over her and closed her eyes as a sign of respect and gratitude for her good treatment during her life. And now, Niels did not understand why his mother said this to the girl in particular. The stepmother wanted to be a good wife and mother all her life. She carefully hid all her pain and wounds from her hated husband, who brought home an illegitimate child. However, in the face of death, there was nothing left in her except bitterness and anger. The stepmother called Yona precisely so that she could see how much she was suffering. The girl told all this only to make it clear that in order to keep his bottom warm, Niels would hide behind the back of the man who had caused pain to his mother for many years. She noticed that the guy could continue to pick up scraps from his table, as he always did. After this, the girl thought that their conversation was over, so she silently left the room. When he returned home, the boss was furious that his mistress had arrived while he was away. He didn't understand how she could be so stupid, because she knew about the anniversary of the death. The butler reported that Yona asked her mistress not to disturb the family and to leave, and it worked. The Count was surprised by his words, so he ordered that Yona be called to his office. The man could not have imagined that the moment would come when he would feel gratitude towards this girl. If he had behaved differently with her, maybe she would have even grown up obedient, because the man often went too far. When he brought Yona into the house, he knew his wife wouldn't be thrilled, so he deliberately humiliated her. Giving preference to Yvonne and Niels, he told a legend that Yona's mother was a poor commoner, but it was not true. Moreover, the girl was not even his illegitimate child, but the Count had to take this secret with him to the grave. Just at that moment, Yona knocked on the door of the office and asked permission to enter. The Count immediately thanked the girl for dealing with his mistress and sending her away. The man immediately realized that if Yvonne were in her place, she would demand new clothes in return. But Yona did not ask for anything. She even noticed that after what happened, her mistress would be in danger, so she offered to send her on a trip. The Count remarked that this was not a bad idea, because if the woman continued to cause problems, he would also have a hard time. Yona was so generous that she even offered to arrange the entire trip herself. If the Count came up with a good reason for her to leave the capital, she promised to secretly take the woman with him. The man was delighted, because he had already traveled enough between the capital and the estate, so he decided to push the inspection of the lands onto the girl. So they decided that this year it would be Yona who would take over the inspection instead of him. The man noted that he had no idea that the girl cared about him so much, and suggested that she forget about past grievances. However, Yona surprised him by admitting that she was not doing this for her father's sake. She added that her mistress did not seem so unfamiliar to her, since she herself was an illegitimate daughter. Lady Fleur was even lucky that she managed to separate from the Count before her pregnancy. Otherwise, her unfortunate child would have suffered the same fate as Yona herself. The Count was furious that this girl was behaving so brazenly and had forgotten that she was greatly indebted to him. He recalled that it was only thanks to him that she grew up not in a dirty alley with a poor mother, but in satiety and prosperity, and got a job in the imperial family. However, Yona understood that there was something fishy here, because the man had deprived his legitimate son and daughter of such luxurious opportunities. She recalled that the Count always claimed that Yona was a member of his family, but at the same time never treated her as his child. Even though it was painful for her, she believed him and went out of her way to please him. And then she realized something. The girl realized that she would never be able to become a real member of the Count's family in her life. Yona spent her whole life as a fifth wheel, and now she was given the chance to become a duchess, so it didn't turn out so bad. Until this moment, the girl only carried out all the Count's orders, but did not ask for anything in return. However, now, when a man needs something from her, he will have to pay in equal amounts. The stronger the Count makes her, the more benefits he will receive, and depending on his decisions, he will be able to become the Duke's son-in-law and reap the benefits of this status. Yona stated that this way they could work together quite well. The Count admitted that he really treated the girl worse than Niels and Yvonne, but he did it only because he wanted her to succeed. However, the girl was not impressed by his words and was going to leave if he had nothing more to offer. The Count stood up from his seat and tried to stop her, reminding her that he was her father. However, Yona suggested that he try to convince others of this because it sounded really impressive. However, she herself was no longer falling for this trick, so she simply turned around and left without any guilt. The next day, the girl hid her appearance as much as possible and asked the coachman to take her to the entertainment street so that no one would notice her. After that incident, the Count, hurt by her words, began to send her gifts every day. Maria very accurately noted that the man did not know her at all, and all his efforts were in vain. The first thing Yona did was go to the house of her great-aunt, who wished to spend the rest of her life in silence and away from society. She calmly knocked on the door, and the maid immediately recognized her, inviting her to come inside. The lady was ill and lay in bed, so she asked to forgive her for her inhospitality. The girl noticed that the house was very nice and tidy, and assumed that the servants had specially cleaned it, so that Yona would feel comfortable. Auntie did her a favor when she allowed her to hold a meeting in her house, which Yona attended. The girl entered the room and saw that the Duke was already there, with an attractive young man sitting next to him. The stranger stood up and introduced himself as Jack, the son of the chief manager of the gold mines. Yona and Jack shook hands to celebrate their acquaintance and hoped for a fruitful collaboration. The Duke explained that the young man had been trained in his father's business from birth, so he had no equal in everything that concerned the management of the mines. The boy said that compared to his father, he still had a lot to learn, but he promised to take on the task with all his zeal. Yona saw his excitement and realized that the young man had not yet been told what he would have to deal with. Jack was so confident in himself that he was still ready to take on the task. However, when he learned that they wanted to give him a job in the Count's family's silver mines, he was shocked. The guy thought that the end had come for him, because this place was in ruins and something was always happening there, and there was no silver left. Yona was amazed that the Duke had brought the poor guy here without telling him where he would have to work. But Khan himself was amused. The man literally read the girl's thoughts, which were written on her face, even though she didn't say anything out loud. He admitted that Yona was literally sawing him to pieces with her eyes, and yet he had tried so hard to find them a competent specialist. The girl realized that it was her turn to bring Jack to his senses and prove to him that the mine would be a success. The girl handed the box to the young man, and opening it, everyone saw a beautiful sample of silver ore. Yona confirmed Jack's suspicions and asked if he really knew how silver was mined. The guy explained that first, the silver had to be ground into dust using a machine. Then, at a very high temperature, it must be burned into dust and ash, and only then from this entire mass pure silver is separated, which is combined into one common ore. He added that during mining, silver is mixed with minerals, so it was natural that the resulting material was not the purest. The young man believed that the girl would think again about whether it was worth starting to mine silver in these mines. The cost of the rewinding machine was very high. Transporting the materials along mountain trails was difficult, which would slow down the production process, and the quality of the ore was poor. However, Yona was going to offer the boy a method for extracting high-quality silver from mixed ore. She explained that it was necessary to crush silver in lead ore, heat them, and mix the ashes. Lead and impurities will be absorbed by the ash, but the silver itself will be separated from the total mass. She even suggested that the young man conduct an experiment with the ore she had just brought. Jack was delighted with her method and asked how she came up with such an innovation. This method of using lead to separate pure silver was called cupellation, and it was only after several years that it was to be passed on to masters from the East. Yona explained that she simply didn't want such fertile land to sit idle, so she began researching different mining methods when she came across this one. However, she asked that this method be kept secret for now and used only in her mines. Otherwise, the market would be saturated with silver and its value would drop significantly. After these negotiations, the girl asked if Jack was ready to go to her silver mines. The young man promised that if I did not arrange everything according to her method, then silver mining would be so successful that she could not even imagine. Besides, lead is very easy to get, which means the cost of the work will not be so high, so Jack was ready to go right now. He was ready to gather the workers and immediately begin setting up the mine. But Yona asked him not to rush. At first, the young man thought she was joking, but then he looked at her serious face and realized that she was not. Yona reminded that the silver mine in those mountains used to be called the Death Mine. Jack was amazed that Yona knew the cause of death among the workers. She knew that all the victims had blue skin and headaches. Most of the miners who died later had previously complained of weakness and dizziness. Even the strongest miners, who could easily lift heavy ores, became completely helpless and could not even climb the mountain. And then the condition began to worsen, and a week later, the person died. Because of this, many decided that epidemics were raging in the mines. However, Yona was sure that all these miners were suffering from altitude sickness. The empire had vast fertile plains, and all the local inhabitants had never been exposed to large changes in altitude, meaning they had no immunity to it. Some went to work in the mountains, seeking to earn more, while others were forced to do so by their lords. Now, the sea trade routes are already open, but in those days, people were so distrustful of strangers that it was difficult to learn even rumors from a neighboring village. Therefore, the miner's disease was considered a curse, and people began to fear this place. Jack didn't know how they could get around this illness and suggested that they should climb more slowly into the city. Yona explained that if you walk more slowly and give yourself time to adapt to the altitude, there won't be any problems, and you also need to make sure you drink enough water. Jack was pleased, because if he had not been warned, it would have been a real disaster. Yona reminded them that safety comes first, and until they solve the labor problem, it would be wiser to recruit people from nearby settlements. Jack promised to do his best and send a report as soon as they got the work process up and running. Yona thanked the guy for his time and waited until he left the house. The Duke was impressed that the girl not only told about a new method of silver mining, but also found out the cause of the miner's illness. He even wondered if Yona could see the future, since she had bought a mine in advance that would bring significant profits. The girl added that the province was land granted by the imperial family, with the condition that the count would periodically give away part of the mined silver within a set time frame. However, the count, wanting to get results from the much-desired imperial mines as quickly as possible, fired all the local miners and hired cheap labor. As a result, the number of incidents increased, and the productivity of the mine itself fell sharply. Many paid with their lives for his uncontrollable thirst for profit. However, even after production declined and the mine closed, it still retained its official status. If the mine were abandoned, it would not matter who owned it. But this question was resolved by itself when the stupid brother lost her at cards. If the imperial family were to learn that the count's heir had given away such a valuable object by foolishly betting it on a game of chance, their reaction would be incredible. After the business deal, Yona and Han went to the establishment to have dinner. The young man ordered a huge number of dishes and hoped that the girl would like them all. They had never dined together before, so the Duke wanted the girl to eat her fill at least once. Yona thanked the young man for the treat and realized that the food was simply wonderful. Khan explained that he had already stayed at this place and everything turned out to be better than he imagined. Yona took a long time to collect her thoughts, then admitted that she would need to leave the capital for the next 10 days. She told how Niels and Yvonne were furious about the recent incident with his mistress. Therefore, the Count decided to send her away, and Yona herself would accompany the woman. The Duke was amazed that the Count was leaving the safety of his mistress in the hands of his adopted daughter. Yona then explained that she had been officially tasked with inspecting the property on behalf of their family. And then the girl added that when she asked for unpaid leave, another problem arose. The Crown Prince set a condition for her and informed her that she must be his partner at the upcoming event. Yona thought that, to avoid misunderstandings, it would be worth telling the Duke about this in advance. The girl was not entirely sure whether she would go to the ball with the prince, but Richard did not bother to explain what exactly the event would consist of. Yona was afraid that the young man was angry about this news. However, Khan admitted that she was not angry at all, because she had no choice. Yona felt relieved by his words, but at the same time disappointed, because deep down she hoped to make him jealous, even though they didn't have that kind of relationship. The Duke admitted that it was his fault that he had provoked the prince, but he himself had not expected such a reaction from him. He even suggested that he should also appear at the event. Khan asked the girl to share with him details about the event as soon as they became known. The young man noticed that Yona was lost in her thoughts, and he had to call her several times to get the girl to wake up. He repeated that he was going to attend the event, where she would go as the prince's companion. Yona promised to notify the Duke in advance when the date was known. Judging by the girl's reaction, Khan assumed that something had happened between her and the prince. Yona couldn't bring herself to tell what had happened, because she was still unsure whether she should do it. However, she did not want the Duke to think that Richard was more important to her. To avoid misunderstandings, she had to tell him everything, so she said that the prince had asked her not to meet the Duke alone anymore. That's why she decided to set up a meeting at her aunt's house, because it was necessary to keep everything concerning the transfer of the mine a secret. Suddenly, the young man became very serious and asked her to tell her honestly if Richard was really dear to her heart. Yona immediately rushed to deny everything, but the Duke insisted that he sincerely believed that such a long-established connection could not be ignored. Yona admitted that she can't just erase the past few years. Even though there was a lot of bad in their relationship, there were still bright moments. That is why she never thought about killing His Highness, which surprised the Duke. The young man assumed that her hatred for the prince was much deeper than he initially thought. Even though the girl denied it, she was so angry with Richard that she came to him for help. The Duke admitted that the prince had behaved stupidly, but the girl was wise, and he himself was very lucky. Yona realized that after Richard's betrayal, she didn't feel angry, but rather empty. She explained to the Khan that it was impossible to be angry or disappointed in someone who no longer meant anything to her. She added that she had not had any feelings for the prince for a long time, so she only faithfully follows her own path. The Duke was embarrassed by her words and admitted that this answer was enough for him. He noticed that Yona always said the right things at the right time, and now he felt like a complete fool. The young man noted that for him, her absence for 10 whole days would be a very long separation. The next day, before dawn, Yona began to implement the next part of her plan. The girl added that before arriving at the mansion of one of the Count's vassals, the mistress would be dropped off at one of the houses on the outskirts. There will be a maid there with her, who is now traveling with them. The Count assigned a servant who was needed for surveillance, because this is the minimum precaution necessary after the scandal that the girl caused in their house. Yona reported that this letter contained an order for the manager, who was subordinate to the Count, to keep a close eye on his mistress. Yona set fire to the letter and wanted Fleur to behave in a way that was contrary to any expectations the Count had. She explained that all a girl needs to do is dress up in fancy clothes, put on the most expensive jewelry, and walk around with the largest crowd of people. The mistress realized that this way she would stand out a lot, because in addition, a maid would be looking after her. The Count believed with all his soul that his servants were loyal only to him, but in fact, they were loyal to the one who paid the most. Fleur realized that she had to play the role of a dissolute courtesan, sitting on the Count's neck and an eyesore to the common people. Yona promised to pay the same as last time, but her mistress wanted a raise for her efforts. The knight received many expensive dresses and jewelry as a gift from the Count, promising to happily give them to her mistress. Fleur found it strange that she always played the role of the villain in this story. She asked the girl if she had decided to bypass her brother and sister and become the head of the family. Yona reminded that Niels had already been officially declared the Count's heir, and that the ceremony of transferring rights would take place 3 days after their departure. The boy was very upset when he found out that Yona would go to inspect the lands instead of him. So to please him a little, the Count decided to hold a small festive evening and declare him the heir there. The Count's intentions were clear, because he wanted to raise a celebratory glass without the obstacle of an illegitimate child nearby. However, Yona, with a smile on her face, noted that becoming an heir was not the same as leading the entire family. At Baron Franz's estate, they believed that the Count had finally gone off the rails. The head of the family, Robert, believed that the man had left all financial affairs to his illegitimate daughter, who would soon leave home. He went to his subordinate and asked about the readiness of the documents. The man was unhappy that the guy had not managed to finish the quarterly estimate, since the Count's daughter had already left the capital. For more than 10 years, he had been in a trusting relationship with the Count, and if he found out that Robert was living in Clover here, he would be in trouble. Most of the people living in the county are free peasants who borrow land. But the Franz family, using any means necessary, turned them into serfs. Serfs are tied to a plot of land with no possibility of escape, and they also pay much more than others. These people work from dawn to dusk and receive mere pennies, but the difference ends up in the baron's pockets. At the same time, all accounting reports and books were clean and impeccable, and it was all thanks to one guy who had a real talent for mathematics. Robert reminded that everything should be ready and in perfect condition by tomorrow morning. He ordered the boy to bring the papers by dawn so that he could check them himself before Yona arrived. Robert wondered since when his assistant had been speaking to him so dryly. He kicked the boy for contradicting him and reminded him that if anything happened, he could harm his father. The Baron was pleased that his threats had weight and forced the boy to obey. He wanted the accountant to make the servants keep their mouths shut while the Count's daughter was here on an inspection. The Baron even asked his subordinate whether he should try to curry favor with the girl. Finn noted that at the moment, her influence in the capital is very great because she will soon marry the Duke. The Baron was surprised that such a tasty husband went not to Yvonne, but to her half-sister Yona. Robert knew that this girl had not been considered a human being in the Count's family since childhood, although they called her an adopted daughter. But she was no better than a slave. That's why, from her youth, she was forced to serve in the palace so that she could grovel before everyone there. Even the Baron agreed that fate and its turns are very unpredictable. He finally stepped on Finn's hand and ordered him to hide all the accounting books as usual. Only after this did the man, whistling a cheerful song, leave the accountant's office. Finn couldn't believe that the adopted daughter, who was not loved in the family, eventually achieved success. If she was able to do this despite the pressure, she is either incredibly stubborn or has no pride at all. The guy believed that if the Count had never cared about this land, then the girl would hardly conduct a thorough check. He understood that nothing would change, and this made him feel even worse. Soon, Yona and Maria arrived to meet the Baron and apologized for distracting them from their business with their sudden visit. Robert was as polite as possible and admitted that he was glad to meet the daughter of the man he serves. He admitted that there is nothing more joyful than a visit from a representative of the Count's family. The Baron assumed that the girl was tired from the long journey, so he offered to show her her room and have dinner. The man watched the girl's face closely and realized that he could not understand what was on her mind. He considered her to be a simple puppet of the Count, a doll without a single thought of her own. The Baron said that he had prepared a room for the girl, in which the Count himself usually stayed. Yona realized that if the maid Sophia was assigned to serve her, it meant that she had a lot of experience. The maid added that the Count usually first looked through the documents that could not be delayed, and then quickly conducted an inspection of the land. In addition, he listened to the business proposals of his vassals. Yona thought that all the documents were in perfect order, but the Baron didn't care at all about how his people lived. She knew that instead of just farming, Robert was very interested in business ideas and investments. So Yona smiled and asked what the maid would receive in return for her help. The maid apologized for the deception and admitted that the Baron was hiding income from the lands, but she knew nothing more. Yona was even disappointed that this girl gave in so quickly, even though Maria had done a good job of persuasion. In the past, this fact also became known to the girl, so there was nothing surprising. Last time, Yona found out much later that the Baron had manipulated the power given to him. This happened after she had already taken over her family, and the accounting records were falsified so well that there was not a single flaw in them, just as they are now. The girl understood that in such a situation, it would not be possible to use accounting, because it would be too suspicious. So she asked the maid if she knew a man named Finn. Yona already knew that he was the one falsifying the reports. She just wanted to find him. The maid begged them not to touch the guy, because he was a victim like everyone else. And in fact, he didn't like it either. She added that Finn is not benefiting. He is being manipulated. And Baron Robert is much worse than everyone thinks. Finn's father, Peter, was a former guild representative who went against the Baron's will after learning that he had turned the peasants into slaves. For this, Robert threw the man in prison, then robbed his guild, accusing them of tax evasion. Taking advantage of the fact that the Count rarely visits these territories, Robert declared himself the Count's deputy. He was very afraid that this fact would come out, so he dealt with the guild. After everything that happened, Peter lost consciousness from shock, and then became seriously ill. Finn was studying far away from here at the time, but upon learning of his father's illness, he also dropped out of school and rushed here. but was no longer able to help in any way. Robert is a dishonest man who uses Peter's medical bills to force his son to work for him while his father is ill. Yona ordered her maid to write down everything they had just heard. The girl guaranteed the maid's safety in exchange for her signing the confession she had just made. However, from this moment on, the girl must obey only Yona and no one else. Meanwhile, the Baron checked the table setting for dinner and was satisfied. The man understood that the true owner of these lands had come to visit, and he was only greeting him. He believed that this was a meeting on equal terms, so he invited the girl to sit down and share dinner with him. The Baron was a little surprised when Yona asked if he really lived in their estate permanently. However, he quickly pulled himself together and admitted that he only occasionally dropped in here from time to time. Robert asked how the Count was doing because he had heard that there had been unrest in the capital lately. Yona explained that her father was busy registering Niels as his heir and was currently preparing an official statement, which is why he had sent her on an inspection. Now everything became clear to the Baron, because there was a whole story behind her appearance here. The man was glad that the old man would vacate his place, although there was little hope for his eldest son, so he postponed this moment. And since that had already happened, it was time to start establishing a relationship with Niels. Robert knew that the Count's son was a real fool, so it would be as easy as pie, and everything worked out as well as possible. The only thing he couldn't figure out was what was on the mind of this Yona, who should have been busy preparing for the wedding. The girl explained that this issue was still at the discussion stage, but marriage was still just around the corner. The Baron congratulated her on her upcoming wedding and asked what Yona planned to do on the lands. The girl planned to tour the lands, but today she had little strength, so it was decided to start tomorrow. The Baron was even ready to personally accompany Yona, but suggested that they first get acquainted with the estate. He realized that the girl was staying there for the first time, so he happily offered to show her around. However, there was no need for this. Yona simply asked that the reports be brought to her room. The Baron was pleased with this arrangement and decided to enjoy the evening, sipping fine wine. The young men drank all evening and finished only when each had drunk several bottles, barely able to stand on their feet. As soon as the girl fell asleep at the table, the Baron ordered the maids to take her to the room and provide all the necessary documents. Sophia later said that the lady came into the room and immediately went to bed. The girl assumed that Yona didn't suspect anything and was unlikely to cause them any problems. The Baron was glad, because that was his plan, to fool the Count's daughter as much as possible and lead them by the nose. The next day, while Robert was suffering from a severe hangover, he had to accompany Yona on a trip through the lands. The man wanted to drink just a little, but ended up overdoing it and getting very drunk. He was glad that since even he felt so bad, the girl must feel even worse now. To his surprise, Yona was already waiting for him at the threshold, looking as if she hadn't drunk at all the day before. During the trip, the man felt nauseous all the time, while the girl did not experience any difficulties. He didn't want to seem weak, so he asked not to stop the carriage and only moved closer to the window. At this point, the man noticed that they were being taken along a different route than the one they had planned to take. Yona noticed that the coachman had no need to change route to dissuade the girl from traveling to the southern lands, but they interested her most of all. The man reminded that Yona had always lived in the capital and was hardly familiar with their customs, so he volunteered to be her guide, so she should listen to his advice. Suddenly, Yona became very serious and asked since when the Baron became the sole owner of these lands. The man did not expect this question, so he seemed wide-eyed and frightened. Yona repeated her question again and asked who gave the man his license. When she heard that he not only looked after the family estate, but also lived in it, she initially thought it was for the sake of simple convenience. However, now, comparing his words with his actions, she began to understand that the reason was neglect of duties. The Baron tried to convince the girl that this was not the case. He didn't understand what had upset her, and he tried to convince her that he only wanted to help. Eventually, the man apologized for what he had done and admitted that he had not meant for his words to upset the lady in any way. Suddenly, the girl ordered the coachman to stop the carriage because she was going to get out and take a walk. The Baron got out of the carriage after the girl and was very surprised by her behavior. He was even more surprised when he realized that Finn had somehow ended up with them in the southern lands. The young man explained that Yona had contacted him and asked him to help her inspect the area. However, he himself did not understand why. Among all the people, she chose him. The Baron found this suspicious and could not understand her behavior at all. However, just in case, he threatened the young man and ordered him to watch his language and actions. The first thing Yona did was go to the nearest workers and demand that they state their names. The workers immediately recognized the noble lady and bowed their heads before her. Judging by their appearance, the girl assumed that they were the peasants renting these lands. She noted that for peasants working on such fertile soil, they were dressed too poorly, and even the food they took with them was meager. According to the documents, this farmer rented about 6 hectares of land. The girl wanted to find out the details with the help of Finn, but the Baron did not understand what she was trying to achieve. Yona asked the accountant for the ledger and wanted to check all the entries again. She found it strange that from such an area, they should have been able to extract at least 12 kilograms of wheat, but the tax report showed only half of that. She remembered very well that last year, they had been informed about the livestock harvest, so she suspected that the peasants had taken some for themselves, but they swore that they had not kept a single sack for themselves. Yona believed that this was a blatant lie, because the figures in the reports were completely different. The farmer was not going to give in and stated that they were telling the truth and would never dare to lie to their landlords. He thought it was unfair anyway, since he had given them everything he had collected from this land. The other peasants thought that the man had gone too far, but it was better to die than to continue living in hunger and poverty. They thought they said it quietly enough, but Yona heard them. Not only did they dare to close half of the harvest, because the landowner was far away, but they also dared to throw mud at their superiors without a drop of remorse. The Baron asked the girl to calm down, suggested that there was an error in the report, and suggested that they check everything again. Yona was unhappy that Robert took their side, even after hearing what they said about her. She ordered the coachman to go immediately to the estate and bring the soldiers here, promising to throw each of these insolent men into prison. Already in prison, the peasants spoke of injustice and continued to insist that they had given everything without reserve. Meanwhile, in his office, the Baron insisted that the Finn acknowledge the reports as error-free. He had to admit the truth of the facts, and the Baron would take care of the rest, citing the fact that the lowly peasants had simply hidden the harvest from them. The man knew that no matter how much they whined and complained, they had no evidence. At some point, Finn simply offered to admit that the report was wrong. However, this enraged the Baron so much that he grabbed the guy by the throat and pressed him against the wall with all his might. He noted that in that case, they would lose everything, and his father would not receive medication and would die. If a boy wants his father to live, he must continue to do whatever he is told. The Baron's lack of restraint was bound to leave marks on the Finn's neck, so he ordered the boy to wear high-necked clothes when he went to Yona. Finn was worried that he had offended the Baron, and there might be consequences, but now was not the time for that. The young man had to put the reports in order so that they did not have a single flaw. He knew that this was the only way he could save his father, so he pulled himself together and mentally prepared himself for the conversation. After this, Finn went to Yona, who wanted to see him. The girl immediately noticed that the guy was late and for some reason had changed his clothes. She walked up to him and tore the bandage off his neck, seeing the marks on his skin. Finn admitted that it was his own fault that he had failed to adequately prepare for the arrival of such an important guest, so the Baron punished him deservedly. The girl didn't even want to listen to this nonsense, simply ordering the young man to sit opposite her. She learned that the guy was 28 years old and had been working for the Baron for the last 8 of those years, since around the same time his father's guild suddenly closed. Yona knew that it was the Baron who threw his father in prison, so she didn't realize that the boy was now working for him. She was just trying to understand how the Finn got involved in this crime, even though he was saying something that it wasn't connected. The young man continued to insist that he had nothing to say in response to these accusations. Yona guessed that the boy was keeping his mouth shut because he was afraid for his father's life. The girl knew that Robert had promised the Finn to take care of the man in exchange for help. In the past life, everything was exactly like this, because the Baron accused the young man of his crimes and fled. Then, Yona interrogated a young man who had only one request. He promised that he would tell everything he knew if the girl could find his father. Then Yona was unhappy that the guy wanted to bargain, because she could have killed him right on the spot. However, Finn knew that she needed the accounting books, and only he knew where they could be found. In her past life, Yona knew that until the boy found his father, not a single word could be extracted from him. So she confessed, so that the Baron could deceive him and hide the fact that her father was already dead. Finn became furious and said that no matter how good her intentions were, lying was too much. The girl admitted that if it were a lie, then in this case, it would be much easier for her to simply promise him that she would find her father. Yona recalled that the Baron had sent the man to another region several years ago under the pretext of treatment. She added that he died that same year, because the disease turned out to be stronger. She added that it is very easy to forge a person's handwriting in correspondence, and Finn had not personally seen his father for a long time. The boy realized that the last time he saw his father was more than a year ago, before his departure, and since then, he had only received letters. At that moment, the young man realized that the girl's words could be true, and that he had been deceived all this time, after which he began to cry bitterly. If Yona had also lied to him and promised to find his father, she could have used him as she pleased. But the girl told the truth. The knight admitted that she did this because, unlike the Baron, she did not want to deceive him. At that moment, the guy was overcome with emotion, and he admitted that he had dreamed of death every day he lived. But now he was no longer afraid of it. In the past life, with only the Count as an example of a family, Yona couldn't understand what it must have been like for Finn to sacrifice himself for his family. However, now that the girl had become closer to the Duke, she began to understand him a little better. Yona wanted to give the guy a chance to do the right thing, because he had been doing all the Baron's dirty work for a long time, and had suffered a lot, which meant he could tell a lot. Now, he was free to change the fates of others, because if anything happened, his death would serve as an example of only a happy escape from reality. The young man collected his thoughts, wiped away his tears, and was ready to provide any information the girl might need. That same evening, the Baron was tied up and dragged into the barn, where he was forced to his knees in front of Yona. The girl decided not to delay and admitted that he was arrested for corruption and embezzlement of the Count's family's income. Robert did not understand what she was talking about, because he had served his master faithfully all his life. Yona immediately stopped his attempts to deceive her, explaining that Finn had told her everything. She noticed that it was not possible to prevent the atrocities, so now she would have to minimize their consequences. The Baron realized that the girl had thought everything through in advance, so he offered to hush up the matter and give her half of the funds he had now in exchange and share the rest in the future. Yona understood that he would take all the money and run away, so the reports would remain here, but the proceeds would disappear along with the man. Then she will tell the Count that the criminal has disappeared with the stolen money, so the father will search for the Baron throughout the country. If Robert were brought to him now, he would be killed on the spot, so her plan would allow him to live a little longer. The Baron realized that everything was bad, because if the Count found out about everything, it would be the end for him. The man tried to come up with some plan, and finally declared that Lady Yona would not get rid of him so easily. He grinned and announced that he knew one very amazing secret. The man thought that the girl would be interested to know who her mother really was. All this time, she knew that she was an illegitimate child, but no one knew who her mother was. The Baron hinted that with the help of this secret he, the second son of the family, managed to win the trust of the Count, inherit the title, and become the manager of his lands. It was strange that no one ever questioned who her mother was and why she abandoned the girl. Yona was delighted with this turn of events because she thought that the Baron had made this up on the fly to save his own skin. The man noted that she had nothing to lose by simply listening to him. He also added that he knew the girl's real age. The Baron admitted that Yona was older than Niels, but all this time she was sure that her younger brother was the eldest child in the family. Yona thought about it and realized that since she had entered the mansion, she had lived in isolation, so the question of age had not occurred to her. The Countess gave birth to Niels 10 months after the wedding, and if we take the Baron's words as true, then it means that she was conceived before the marriage. However, if the truth had been known, no one would have condemned the Count for adultery in marriage. Then it became unclear why the man hid her age, thereby worsening the burden of his own mistake. The Baron offered to make a deal and asked to let him escape abroad, and after that, he promised to tell everything in detail. He assured that these were not empty rumors, because he personally saw and heard everything. Once upon a time, he could not even imagine that he would receive so much benefit due to the fact that he witnessed a certain event in his childhood. At that time, he was still a small servant in the house of the Count, who, after meeting a stranger and a child, ordered the servant to forget everything in exchange for becoming his patron. Now the Baron said that he wanted to move far away, and he didn't care what kind of country it would be. If Yona helps him settle in his new place, he will keep everything that happened here a secret for the rest of his days. The girl noted that he had better keep his word, because now the security on their lands was too strong, and it would not be easy for him to escape, and he would have to hide here for a while. She added that she would transfer everything necessary through trusted people. The Baron believed that he was very lucky again. All he had to do was get out of this place, and then he would live happily ever after again. Outside, Yona told the guards that in 2 days, when she returned to the capital, the guard would be removed, at which point they could take the prisoner away. One of the guards asked if their plan remained unchanged. Yona ordered them to pretend that they were going to the port, then get rid of the Baron and throw his body into the sea, because she had no intention of making any deals with this freak from the very beginning. She knew better than to trust such slugs, even though she had known nothing about her mother in her past life. If she had been interested, she would have hired people to investigate long ago. But the things that seemed natural to many did not touch her. She never cared at all whether her mother was alive or why she left her. There was no room in the girl's heart for longing for forgotten memories. The guards released all the peasants, because it turned out that the Baron was behind all the arrears, who turned honest peasants into slaves, but kept false records of profits. The men realized that this was why they were being suspected of not paying enough taxes. The guards added that the Count's daughter carefully checked the documents, found flaws in them, and got to the bottom of the truth. So the girl announced that now they were all free, as were their family members. In addition, all rights to land ownership, previously illegally taken from them, will again come into force, and after the debts are paid off, the peasants will be rewarded. Yona asked her not to thank her, because she didn't need anything, and she also asked to convey her deepest apologies for the inconvenience. The peasants were surprised, but promised to pass on the news to the others when they returned to the village. The guards knew that it might be difficult at first, but the lady was very hopeful that the former order would be restored as soon as possible. Soon all the prisoners returned to their families and spread the news throughout the area, promising themselves that they would be eternally grateful to the girl for her help. Yona was busy putting the documents in order, and in the meantime, she called Lord Klaus to her. The young man did not understand why he was suddenly being given attention, and was afraid that the girl would think that he was helping the Baron. The guy would never do such a thing, but he was so nervous that he was completely speechless. He was very surprised and frightened when suddenly Yona admitted that she had called him to offer him to take over for the Baron. The girl was pleased that the young man was horrified by her proposal. Daniel Klaus, the youngest son of the Klaus family, unlike the Baron, was very humble and soft-hearted, which made him one of the best managers, who did not like to deceive people too much. The guy didn't want to take on such responsibility and thought that the girl would be better off finding someone more suitable. Daniel knew very well what he was capable of, so he was afraid that if everything came under his control, the lands would become a living hell on earth. Yona laughed and noted that the boy had a surprisingly low opinion of his abilities, since no one could do worse than the Baron had already managed to do. She explained to the young man why she chose him for this position. In fact, Klaus touched her very much, because among all the families living in this territory, the Baron did not touch only one with his finger. The young man was very embarrassed when he realized that she was talking about his own family. Yona knew that the Baron had conspired with all the other families and was extorting money from them, and only one had not given in to his persuasion. She praised the young man for his perseverance and admitted that it was very charming. Although Klaus did not have much experience in management, he was supposed to be assisted by a Finn who was a true professional in his field. Finn was still not sure that the girl wanted to see Baron Klaus in this place. However, she stated that the choice was quite simple. Most likely the guy would be loyal to her. Besides, he strictly follows orders. The girl added that his naivety would only play into his hands, and those who could also lay claim to Klaus's place would be extremely unhappy. They can protest as much as they want, because they no longer have any power. The Count's confidants followed him to the capital, and those who remained here were only scum. They worked together with the former Baron and stole the budget together, but the girl did not plan to punish them all. The information she has on them will be much more useful if she uses it wisely in the future. Besides, Yona had a personal assignment for Finn, which she carefully wrote down. It was evidence of corruption and a threat to make it public, which would be quite useful to use if they came across stubborn interlocutors. The guy was surprised that the girl trusted him so much, because not long ago he worked for the Baron and helped him in all matters. However, Yona didn't care, and besides, she knew that Finn was not confident in him after everything. If the guy hadn't given her evidence of the Baron's crimes, Robert would still be free. She reminded him that she had promised to give him a chance to correct all the mistakes he had made. The young man swore that from that moment on, he would serve the girl faithfully and truly. Yona was thinking about this when she met her father's mistress, so she didn't notice when she called her. Fleur realized that the girl was worried about something because she had put 10 whole spoons of sugar in her tea, and she hadn't even noticed. Finn's words still echoed in Yona's head, because in his past life, he had also worked for her. He did a lot of the dirty work that Richard asked him to do. But one day, the widow of one of the dead aristocrats came to them and sent an assassin to kill the guy. Yona managed to track down the criminal, but by that time, the young man had already been wounded by a poisoned blade. After his death, Yona deeply regretted not being able to protect him, but this time she couldn't let that happen. The girl explained that sometimes you need to completely immerse yourself in your thoughts, otherwise you won't find the right solutions. The mistress did not expect any details, but she heard that Yona was returning to the capital tomorrow. It was true, because one of the stages in the girl's plan had come to an end, and it was time to return. Fleur said that her maids had long tongues, so they would spread the news of her luxurious lifestyle quite quickly. Thanks to their chatter, she appeared before everyone as a noble lady with a difficult fate. Yona noted that if any of them were too annoying, they could be replaced with anyone, and the staff of servants could also be expanded. The mistress was a little bored, so she asked to add an escort for her so that she could get out of the house and walk around the area safely. She was even a little sorry that after leaving with Yona, they would not see each other again. But the tea had cooled down enough, and it was time to proceed to the next stage of their plan. The mistress laughed, and then threw the cup on the floor with all her might and began to shout loudly and insult Yona so that the servants could hear. In front of everyone, she demanded that they show her due respect or shut up. Yona knew that if Fleur could turn everyone against her, then when the Count arrived here, his reputation would be the same. Their plan was nearing completion, and all that was left was to sort out the paperwork. It was almost time for lunch, but Klaus was confused by the fact that no one present had even gotten up from their seats. Everyone continued working when they heard someone outside trying to break into the office without permission. After the story with the Baron became known to the public, Yona deliberately did not leave this house. She had heard that other subjects had come here to voice their dissatisfaction, but they lacked the courage, so they simply turned around and left. The girl decided that one of them had finally lost his patience, so he decided to break into her door personally. The huge door was kicked with all its might, and a man appeared on the threshold who was clearly unhappy. Finn reported that Baron Chris was in front of them, and he was unhappy with the disrespect shown by the girl. He stated that all this time he had been writing notices about the visit, but until today, he had not received a single response from the girl. Yona admitted that she didn't answer only because she didn't want to see anyone. Chris believed that the girl was afraid of something, since she was running away from her subordinates and hiding within the walls of the estate. However, the knight pointed out to him a whole stack of documents next to her, which she needed to sort out in the remaining time. She had only 5 days left before leaving for the capital, and there was still a lot of work to do. The girl did not understand why the man wanted her to drop everything and listen to his offended babble. She asked Finn to call the guards and throw the visitor out, but he resisted, which finally drove the girl crazy. Klaus, who was still in the office, was so scared of what was happening that he dreamed of just quietly running away. Yona noticed this, so she asked the young man to go to the kitchen and order that dinner be served to them. Chris believed that the girl sent the others away so that everything said would not reach other ears, but he promised to remember every word and insult she said. After this, Yona completely lost her temper and said that only a complete fool could believe that she didn't want to see him just because she was busy with work. In fact, she had her own reasons for that.